Armstrong, and this is the second of a series of fireside chats which we will do periodically to keep you abreast of the state-of-the-art spiritual happenings in the world. This subject tonight has to do with the Photon Belt. The Photon Belt first came to my attention about 18 months ago, really, maybe almost closer to 2 years. And at the time I heard people talking about it, I didn't lend much credence to it. In fact, I had sort of a biased attitude about the whole thing because there's so many woo-woos and airy-fairies around, and they're always coming up with some new innovation. And many times, of course, it's simply to make money or to capitalize upon the gullibility of people. So I look at these things rather askance to begin with, but over a period of time it begins to take on credence, and of course I will look at it more closely. In this particular instance, although I had poo-pooed the whole thing as another gimmick by the general New Age community, Spirit spoke to me and said to stop it because it was something very serious and that I should look into it, and once I understood it, that I should go forth and share it with the world and the public. I did that this past fall. I was in Europe, and I have my fall tour over there. And I went to Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Denmark, and Sweden, and I shared this information with the Europeans, and it was extremely well received. Just prior to going to Europe also, we had a presentation in Columbus, Ohio, and that was really the first place I had really touched upon it in any depth. But again, it was extremely well received. So since then, I've done considerably more insights and research on it. And I think now we have a pretty good composite picture of what this is all about. Now, the Photon Belt is unique in and of itself, but there were events leading up to the ultimate, which is, of course, the Photon Belt and the monastic ray, or radiation. The first principal demonstration of a change in consciousness actually took place in 1987, and it was commonly known, of course, as the harmonic convergence. That was August the 16th, 1987. That marked, in a sense, according to the Mayan calendar, it marked an end of a consciousness and a world, because it also marked the entrance into the sixth world and the leaving of the fifth world in the Mayan prophecy. Now, the sixth world is a reality, but it differs, of course, from its predecessors in that it is blank. And in this period running between August the 16th of 1987 and our current times and up to the date that we enter the Photon Belt, we basically have a blank sheet, and we'll write our future and our destiny and everything about us on that blank sheet between 1987 and, of course, the year 2000. Now, the reason I'm saying that is prophecy ended as we know it, that is, the Mayan prophecy ended as we know it on that particular date, August the 16th, 1987. And what had happened is they said, we have taught you everything we know. We taught you, of course, to crawl. We taught you to walk, and we taught you to run. We have nothing else to teach you. Now you must go out and exercise these powers yourself. So since that date, we as mankind in general, have been on our own, and we have been painting our individual destiny and purpose day by day. And so leading from that, of course, we get into some other phenomena which were predecessors to the Photon Belt phenomena, which we're going to be talking about tonight. I think one of the most remarkable things, in addition to the harmonic convergence in 1987, had to do with a solar eclipse. Actually, it was a lunar eclipse that happened in 1991. And it was a precursor, if you will, to the 11/11 ceremony, which was commonly observed throughout the world in 1992. The 1991 incident had to do with the overshadowing of the sun by the moon, a total eclipse. And it was one of the most spectacular views of an eclipse, I think, in all of man's history, really. Now, it's rare that the moon will overshadow the sun to the extent that the sun can no longer be seen, but that's exactly what did happen. Now, most people didn't understand the phenomena and what it meant. Basically, what it represented was the female energy, the feminine, overpowering, if you will, and overshadowing the male energy, which of course is the sun. Now at that point, there was a transformational process which took place, both of course in the ethers, but also into the bodies of men, of women. And so this transformational change, of course, signaled a metabolic and also spiritual change in both men and women. For instance, the women would then, of course, become the predominant energy upon the planet, and she has been all along, but of course she's been totally subjugated. But she would step forward with more certitude and, of course, realization that she was a power. And ever since that date in 1991, we have seen the emergence of women taking up responsible positions in government, in science, in religion, and corporate, and many other aspects of, you might say, world affairs. Women, of course, have been emerging, as natural leaders. We have good examples, of course. We have Margaret Thatcher. We have Bhutto in Pakistani. We have a new prime minister at this time, a very young lady in Turkey. And there are many more prime examples of the power of womanhood and femininity, which of course is beginning to surface and truly indicate that this is in a sense, a woman's world. And any man that doesn't admit that, of course, he's a damn fool, really, because the power does lie there, and more in the future is going to be more evident. Women have always controlled men in one way or another, and I don't say that disparagingly. It's just it's a compliment, really, because they are the stable influence many times behind government, corporate, and many other things which, of course, men receive the credit for. But as time progresses, they, of course, in this feminine energy which we're relating to, are going to become more and more predominant, and in the end, of course, we must acknowledge it. As I said, our planet is feminine in aspect, and of course, the Indians reverently call her Mother Earth, or the Great Mother, and then there are other races that call her the Gaia Mother, and what have you. So it stands to reason then that the favored sex would be, of course, the feminine energy, and of course that's what's transforming our energies right now, that femininity which is increasingly coming into the consciousness of mankind at this point in time. Now, there are other events which, of course, led up to the Photon Belt, and I'm not going to go into those in depth. And I think for the purposes of economy, so to speak, I think we should get right into the Photon Belt. Now, the Photon Belt represents the end times. Many people say, well, what is the Photon Belt? And it has twofold meanings. One is it is a spiritual experience, and of course it's also recognized scientifically as being a phenomenon which they don't truly fully understand, and they probably never will. Science first discovered the photon belt and the monastic radiation array in 1961. It wasn't until 1962, though, that science came forward and, of course, began to relate to it in scientific articles, and then later on in general magazines and things of this nature. But as time went on, of course, it then began to receive spiritual attention. And of course, this is what I would like to address tonight, is the spiritual impact and import of the photon belt upon mankind at large. Science probably knows everything we do about the spirituality of the photon belt. Of course, they're not prone to mention that. They never do. Science and government, of course, whether we like to believe it or not, are great metaphysicians themselves, and they have repositories which are unlimited in terms of not just scientific knowledge, but also esoteric and metaphysical knowledge. But of course, they don't feel that mankind is ready for this type of thing, so therefore they don't divulge it to you and I. Okay, let's go to the photon belt, and we're going to go to the board in just a minute, and I'm going to show you illustratively what the photon belt actually is. But as I relate to it right now, I want you to visualize in your mind that it is a precessional cycle, if you will. It represents an energy which evolves and, of course, rotates around the central sun of our solar system. Every solar system has a central sun. And in our case, the central sun is one known as Alcyone, and that's Alcione, and it's located in the Pleiadian constellation. It is the focus and center point, if you will, for all of the astronomical phenomena, of course, within our solar system. Everything in God's creation has a systematic and cyclic order, and of course, in this case, there's no difference. We do have a cyclic rotation here. It's a rotation around the central sun, Alcyone, which takes roughly 26,000 years to make one cycle or full movement around the central sun. Actually, the figure is 25,860, but just round it out to 26,000, and you have a pretty near accurate number. Now, the procession of planets, including ours, of course, as it proceeds around the central sun, and again, you will see this when we get to the board in just a minute, as it proceeds around the sun, the central sun, in a counterclockwise direction. Now, notice what I said. I said it's a counterclockwise direction. In our realization and reality here on Earth, everything that goes clockwise is considered to be, good. Everything that goes counterclockwise is considered to be negative. So one is positive and one is negative. Now, that, of course, points up something very quickly. If in the major cycles in God's universe, everything goes counterclockwise, there must be something wrong down here on our planet, for us to consider that clockwise is the positive side and counterclockwise is the negative side. But, of course, that goes into a deeper investigation, too, which has to do with polarities. It also has to do with the people who put us here millenniums and millenniums and millenniums ago. In the Sumerian Chronicles, that's the first recorded history of mankind, there is intent mentioned of someone putting us here to use us as their property and to be the stewards for them of this planet. That planet, of course, that we're talking about, and that extraterrestrial intelligence, which is far infinitely greater than ours, was known as Wormwood. It has many other names. For instance, Marduk is another name for it. Phaeton is one of the most recently applied appellates. And so it's known by many names, but it's basically, for instance, it's mentioned in the Bible as Wormwood. Now, the Wormwood planet is the mentor, our mentor, if you will. They are the overseers of our planet. They consider us to be their property. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, there was mention of this phenomena, and of course the bottom line was that I'll be damned, they put us here to farm us like sheep, cattle, and geese, and of course that's very true. What they did in order to control us to the degree that we would, of course, emulate them, and also that we would follow their dictates and wishes, was they created a world of illusion. And this world of illusion is the wrong side of the mirror, so to speak. I just mentioned a couple of minutes ago that we consider everything to be in a clockwise direction, or to the right to be positive, and everything to the left or to be negative, or counterclockwise negative. We find in these times, though, that we have discovered, many of us have discovered, that this is actually a perpetrated and created illusion in order, as I said earlier, to actually control us, to keep us, you might say, not only in illusion, but also in amnesia, to keep us from realizing how great we really are, because in fact, we are gods in amnesia. You know, Jesus said 2,000 years ago when he was stridently addressing the Pharisees, he said, "Go read your books. Your books state, know ye not that ye are gods." And of course, that is an absolute truth. That revelation, of course, pertains to you and I today. Each one of us down here is a God in amnesia. We've forgotten it. We've forgotten that we're gods. But the time is coming now in these end days that we must once again come back to the realization that indeed we are gods in amnesia, and that we have been deluded, that we have been duped, so to speak, to accept something which is not real, which of course is a form of illusion. Now, as the end days approach, and as we approach the Photon Belt, these realizations, of course, are going to have to be set aside. Not the majority, but many people in the world now, I would say probably about 1.5 billion people all over the world, are beginning to realize that what they thought was a certainty or a reality is not so. And so there's going to be a transformational process which is already in the making, which is going to cause us to reach out and change things which we feel are not appropriate at this time. Now, that's going to move more rapidly as we come under the stronger influence of the monastic ray and also the Photon Belt. So that's a brief introduction of what the Photon Belt is. Maybe a simplified explanation of it is that the Photon Belt represents the ultimate end to consciousness as we know it. It also represents a movement from the third dimension, the one we're in right now here upon planet Earth, into the fourth and fifth dimension. Now the question may come, well, why do you say the fourth and fifth? Shouldn't it be just the fourth? And the answer is no. In this particular instance, we're talking about one known as the laggard. In fact, the Bible mentions the laggards, you know. And we are a laggard planet in one sense, although we do play a divine role, a very important divine role in the creation of all things, and particularly in the process of passing into and experiencing the Photon Belt. We, of course, in the past, as I've said, have been deluded to the extreme, and as we begin to reach for the truth of matters, you know, as we nearer and nearer approach the Photon Belt, a transformational process will take place in each one of us, which will raise our consciousness and raise our awarenesses so that we begin to perceive the truth as opposed to the lies and deceits and illusions and so forth that have been perpetrated upon us in the past. These are the end times in that man's consciousness now is about to end. The Mayan calendar stated that, and it's interesting to note, and incidentally, there's only a divergence of 2 days between the Judean calendar and the Mayan calendar. One says 2011, the other one says 2013. Many others now have taken that intermediate date and say now it's going to be 2012. Doesn't make any difference. You're talking about 3 years, you know, so what's that? That's a spit in an ocean, you know, in the cycle that we're talking about right now. So these end times coming up by the year 2000 and ending, of course, in the year 2005 are going to change the consciousness of mankind and transform us in every way, physically, emotionally, spiritually, and any other way that we can possibly think of. And again, we'll get into that later on in the questions and answers so I can elaborate on that a bit more. Let's, for the sake of argument and also for the sake of erudition, let's go to the board now and take a look at some of the things which we should be aware of at this moment as we begin to experience more and more the end times. So with that, I would like to go to the chart and point out the specifics of some of the things which I've been talking about. Okay, we're at the board now, but before I get into the Photon Belt itself, you know, in fact, I want to make another brief review in terms of what's happening to the planet at this very moment and what the overall divine scenario is in regards to actually going into the photon belt. There's some very momentous things, of course, which have to take place first, and I've already mentioned a few of them, like the harmonic convergence and, of course, the changing of the feminine to the actually the masculine to the feminine, and many other things, of course, which are preludes to the actual entrance into the photon belt. And what we're looking at here is one of these particularly interesting phenomena, because it has to do with the overall precession of the planet as it approaches the end times. If you look at the chart, we have Earth down here, surrounded by orange. We have another precession of Earth up here, in other words, another magnitude of Earth, and its precession into the higher dimension. And ultimately up here at the top, we see what is known as the new Earth. Notice, too, that we're talking about the third dimension, the fourth dimension, and the fifth dimension. And I had said earlier that we are now making a quantum leap into the future. We're moving from the third dimension into the fourth and fifth dimension simultaneously. Now, the reason for this is that we have been a laggard planet in the past. If you look down here on the right-hand lower corner of the chart, you'll notice that it says Confederation of Planets. We notice that there are 11 planets already in a state of readiness, ready to graduate from the third dimension into the fourth dimension. But we notice down here another little planet, which of course is not in the precession at this time. The process that we're looking at right now, as we approach the photon belt and as we approach the monastic radiation, is that we must now, before we enter into the photon belt in the year 2000, we must play catch-up with our sister and brotherhood planets, or the Confederation of Planets. We must join them, because otherwise the solar system cannot graduate into the higher realms of consciousness, which again, of course, represent the fourth and fifth dimension. So we have basically 5 years from the current date to the year 2000, which represents the entrance into the fourth dimension. We now have to proceed up. We must now join the Confederation of Planets. And when we do that, then our solar system, of course, is in a state of readiness. Now, all of this has to happen before we actually enter into the photon belt. And that is the process that's taking place at this very moment. Every eye is upon us. For this reason, since we are so important to the Confederation of Planets and to, of course, the graduation into the higher consciousness, if you will, nothing is going to deter us at this point in time. The greatest enemy, of course, is ourselves. We might deter it. For instance, some of the insane, I should say, governments and what have you, or the insanity of mankind could possibly cause a nuclear war. But you will find out later on that will not be permitted. At all costs, this planet must graduate and join the Confederation of Planets in order to go on into the higher dimensions of the fourth and fifth dimension. Let's walk through this step by step, though, because there's an interesting phenomenon that's taking place here. Earth in the third dimension is in the process of, as I've already related, of proceeding into the higher realms. We notice here that we have a belt, as you see it here, which is, we must pass through that before we reach the fourth dimension. Now, this belt is called the asteroid belt, and it's divided into two parts, as we see it here, the lower astral and the higher astral. Now, this orange that you see here in this position of planet Earth passing through the asteroid belt, the astral belt, I should say, is signified down here when we look at planet Earth number 1. You notice this orange ring around the planet. This is a protection barrier, if you will, to contain all of the negative aspects of our planet that we create each and every day. This would be our own stinking thinking, stinking actions, and negativity that we create each and every day in our common day living. Past history and all the negative aspects also are stored up here in this belt that surrounds our planet, as you see it here. This is more representative up here, as you can see it in this second diagram. And what we're talking about is that every thought and every action of the past has been recorded. Now, to keep us from contaminating and to also influence other planets adversely, of course, God had the wisdom to protect them and also ourselves. God also had the wisdom to make sure that we had to deal with and rectify each and every negative thing that we have done in the past. So within that great wisdom, there is a belt of containment as we see here and as we see up here in the astral belt. Every dire deed, every negative thought, every negative action, of course, if it wasn't dealt with propitiously and immediately down here in this level in the third dimension, we now have to deal with it as we pass through the astral plane on our way to the fourth dimension. So right now, what we're looking at is our planet is somewhere in this position here, and we're right in the middle of experiencing the astral belt and all the negative things that we have, of course, created for ourselves as a planet, as a consciousness, and as a peoples in the past. Now, to signify some of this in a more demonstrative way, take a look around the world. Look at Yugoslavia. Look at Somalia. Look at Haiti. Look at Rwanda. And look at Russia now, the former Soviet Union, and the great difficulties and travesties of justice that they're also experiencing there. These things are all, you might say, representations of our thinking, and actions of the past. We're now having to experience those as we pass through the lower astral, readying ourselves, of course, to join the Confederation of Planets and also to reach for and to enter the Photon Belt in the year 2000. And, of course, at that time, as you see also, the two relate, we also enter into the fourth dimension. But we must go through all of these frailties first before we can actually accomplish the ultimate. That is the entrance into the Photon Belt and the entrance into the fourth and fifth dimension. Now, ultimately, when we do this, of course, we will then be a new planet Earth. That's the new Earth. Now, look over here, if you will, to the right where it says E. That represents an alternate planet. You know, there'll be many who will not make this great leap into the future. In other words, they will not make this quantum leap into the future, the fourth and fifth dimension. So if they're not qualified and they don't make it, what happens to them? As of this point, it is estimated that there's 1.5 billion people who are ready to graduate into the higher dimensions of fourth and fifth dimension and the Christ consciousness, because as you will see a little later on, what we're really talking about here is the Christ consciousness. There are many who cannot and will not accept the incoming Christ consciousness. Now, the photon belt is, of course, representative of that, but more fittingly, the monastic radiation array is also the Christ consciousness. It is the radiation, the eminence of the Christ, of course, and as it nears us and we near it, of course, these great transformational changes will take place. Now, some of these transformational changes which take place will not be good. And there'll be the many who will not choose to accept the incoming Christ consciousness. And so what happens to them? The 1.5 billion, and possibly by the time we enter into the fourth dimension, 2 billion, will, of course, go on to into the higher realms and Christ consciousness, but the others have to go someplace in order to repeat the cycle again. And, you know, being here on Earth and experiencing these things is like going to school. If you flunk a grade, you have to repeat it. So if we don't make it this time around, of course, we have to repeat the whole process again. The vehicle for that, of course, is this alternate planet Earth, which is in a state of readiness in the fourth dimension, as you see it here. It's in the etheric. As people transpire or die or decease here upon Earth, what happens to their spirit? That's what the preposition, of course, that they are not ready to go into the Christ light and, of course, the Christ radiation. What happens to them? Well, they'll be taken off to this alternate planet that we see up here. They'll go into a deep sleep. They'll be held in repository until such time it's proper for them to come down and replace us here in the third dimension in the third dimension reality as the new planet Earth, you see. Now, the phenomenon is simply this. It's a very simple modus operandi. As we, the planet, let's say that my right hand, of course, is our planet at this present time, and the other planet that we're looking at right here is up here, we're here. As we progressively ascend, they progressively, notice that, descend, you see. So that when we reach the fourth dimension, they then will be down here in the position that we once were as a new planet Earth. And of course, all of these embodiments, of course, which are constituted of the souls which could not accept the incoming Christ consciousness, now, of course, will be down here in the third dimension again, and they have to repeat the whole process once again. Very sad, but that's the way it is, and that's the way it goes. Now, that basically represents, if we take our present civilization on this planet, it's something like 6 billion, that means that 4 billion people will have to come back down to Earth and repeat the whole process again. Hopefully, it's not going to be you or I. Okay, so that's the basic basic things, I should say, which are happening on the planet right now and in our consciousness. Our ultimate destination, of course, is to reach the fifth dimension, and that will constitute the new planet Earth, of course, and we, at that time, will summarily be within the fourth and the fifth dimension. Notice that the year 2000 is the fourth dimension, and the year 2005 is the fifth dimension. To give you some idea of what the fifth dimension is all about, that is the dimension which the great one known as Jesus came back from. He was a very high evolvement. He chose to come from the fifth back into the third, to come down here, walk amongst us, and to teach us the things that we know today. Okay, I think so much for that. Let's go over here now to a more specific and aligned example, graphic example, I should say, of the photon belt. We know what our process has been here. Now let's take a look at the photon belt and see what we can expect. Remember what I said earlier? I said it was a processional thing. In other words, I said that everything evolved and rotated around the central sun, Alcyon, which of course is in the Pleiadian constellation. Everything goes counterclockwise, and there's a phenomena which is steadfast true throughout all of this. One is, as we proceed around the central sun, Alcyon, we are in 10,500 years of darkness. These are the dismal times, you see. Now, at the end of a 10,500 year period, we then come upon what is known today, and the subject that we're discussing right now, as the photon belt, or the golden age, or the age of light. We have this opportunity twice in a 26,000 rotation around the central sun. You notice you have one here to the north, somewhat biased, and we have one to the south, of course, somewhat slanted. So we have two opportunities to get off the wheel of karma and to go into the light and into the fourth and fifth dimension, if we so choose. Of course, it is our free will that dictates whether we will or will not do that. So let's take a look at this and see what we can expect. We are just 5 years, if you will, from entering the fourth dimension, which is the very edge of the photon belt. As we come to the year 2000, we immediately come into the essence and the beingness of the photon belt. And at this point, of course, we are then ensconced, if you will, in the consciousness of the Christ. So I think what I'd like to do at this time, as soon as I finish this, we'll ask some questions, some specific questions about the photon belt and what can be expected. Let me point out, too, that although this is 26,000 years divided into graduations of 2,000 years here and here, 10,500 years here and here, making a total somewhere around 25,860 years, it is a small little part of a greater cycle. That greater cycle being 206 million years. So that's one major cycle, 206 million years. And of course, we're going through that puny part of 26,000. Of course, if you divide 26,000 into 206 million, that tells you how many times we must go around the central sun before we complete one major cycle. For those of you, of course, can view this closer, there are some interesting things that you will see down here. It talks about the historical events, the beginning of biblical chronology. We have Noah's flood and experience. We have the erection of Cheops Pyramid, Sodom and Gomorrah, and of course it gives the dates on those. David when he slew Goliath and so forth, and all that is listed over here, you see. It breaks it down into years and pinpoints each one of these great events. All events, of course, are recorded within the Photon Belt because it is a record of mankind's consciousness and also events. Okay, so take that and study it. I'm only using a small part of it, this being the Photon Belt here and here. I think it is important, once again, to impress upon you, though, that each time that we leave the Photon Belt, we have to experience 10,500 years of darkness. We have been in the darkness for 10,500 years. We are now ready to emerge from the darkness and go into the light, or the golden age, or the Christ consciousness, and of course the fourth and the fifth dimension. All right, let's go back now to questions and answers, if you will. I think this pretty well illustrates the Photon Belt and what it's all about. But now let's get back into some specific questions so that hopefully I can give you some better understandings of what is going to happen to you in this whole process of evolution and in this whole process of experiencing the end times. Okay? Okay, now that we've reviewed the charts and we have some idea of what the process is going to be, what we'd like to do now is to get into some pointed questions about the Photon Belt. These questions, of course, have been sent in by other people. There are also questions that were particularly asked of me while I was in Europe lecturing in the fall of last year. And so what we've done, we've put these questions together to represent a composite, if you will, of what the Photon Belt is all about. And since they were the questions which, of course, were raised by people all over the world, I think it's most appropriate then to include them here in this presentation. Okay, one of the questions that was asked is if the Photon Belt is reality, what transitional changes can we expect on our planet? Well, and also let's discuss this from the point of our bodies, our consciousness, and the now and the future. Now, I've already indicated when we were at the board, the transformational changes, great transformational changes, are in the making. And there's going to be a complete change of all things, whether it be our bodies, our consciousness, the planet, or anything and all around us. You will find later on that these changes, of course, are already taking place. I pointed out that they really began August the 16th, 1987. But time is so sped up since then, and is going to become even more so in the relatively near future. As an example, our planet, for instance, moves through space at roughly 18,000 miles per hour. And it is said that at such time that we enter the leading edge, or the null zone of the Photon Belt, we will have reached a speed as a planet of over 208,000 miles per hour. Now relate that to the 18,000 that we're moving right now, and that indicates that we will have sped up and accelerated to 190,800 and some odd in velocity. Now, it stands to reason that if we go through these great speeds and accelerations, that it's going to transform any and all in its wake and also in its advance. And that, of course, applies to us here upon this planet. As time is sped up, there's going to be dramatic changes, of course, in our bodies and in our consciousness. Let's discuss our bodies. Let's begin with that first. Our bodies are undergoing, and have been for quite some time, this isn't a recent thing. We can go back into probably with the inception of mankind, really, but we could go back as far as the 1800s, 1900s, and into our current state of the art. And there's been a progressive process taking place within the human body. And what we've been striving to do, despite all the odds, is that we have been striving to change a body which is dense in its nature. In other words, it's a body of corporeality. We are in the process of transforming it into a vehicle of light. Now, we couldn't possibly withstand the rigors of the acceleration that we're talking about unless the body, too, is transformed in order to withstand the rigors of the acceleration which we are now experiencing and will experience, of course, in greater degrees later on. The consciousness also of our bodies, of course, well, let me finish another aspect of the body first. The Bible states, dust to dust, earth to earth. That was the old negative approach. That was one that was taught to us. That's one that was imposed upon us. It was one that was programmed in us, because in order to control us and keep us under subjugation, those who put us here, they had to have us to be extremely vulnerable and recyclable, so to speak, you see. So they, of course, put us into a body which was short-lived. And then they taught us, of course, to be born, of course, is to be sick, to be controlled, to be contrived, and everything else. That death was a horrible thing. So they put these great things upon us, which, of course, left us in a negative reality, which in turn, of course, kept us in a body of density, a body of corporeality, one that indeed, in accordance with the Bible, went from dust to earth to earth. That's changed. As the molecular structure, the atomical structure of the body, of course, accelerates and changes, we become more and more of the light. And, of course, that's the purpose of this process we're going through right now. Each and every person upon the planet, if they will attend and believe in these things, which, of course, I'm expostulating at this point, our bodies will, of its own volition, change into one of the Christ consciousness or one of light. Now, any and all of us who can do this, transform our bodies of corporeality into a body of light, of course, stand, well, it's very possible that we will enter the photon belt and, of course, the eminence of the Christ consciousness, and we will be, of course, of the fourth and fifth dimension. Now, needless to say, along with the transformation of the body from density into light, and incidentally, I'll touch upon that quickly, Jesus showed us how to do this when he was resurrected. You know, he also said during his ministry, he said, "These things I do, ye shall do even greater." And by golly, we're going to do it, you know. He prophesied it, and here we are in the process of doing the very things that he said we would. We will go into exalted states of consciousness. We will go into our light bodies just like he did. Remember, in the third day after he was crucified, on the third day he arose, and he was approached by Mary, and Mary went to touch him, and he said, no, don't touch me, I'm not yet formed, you know. At that point in time, he was assuming his light body from that body of corporeality. Now, he had to go through a transformational sort of I don't know how to explain that, but his was a systematic procedure. It was an immediate thing that he had to accomplish, you know, in 3 days. We've been given the opportunity, though, of 25, 50 years would be more like it, 50 years, 25 years into the now. And in this process, we have, if we've been doing it right, we have been transforming this body of corporeality into a body of light. So that when the time comes, of course, to enter the photon belt, we will be, of course, in accord and harmony with it. And, of course, we'll have no difficulty stepping from one dimension into the other. So there is a transformational process which is taking place. We're going to shed the old body, this archaic and outworn consciousness of a body, into one of Christ consciousness, and one which is capable of stepping from the third dimension automatically into the fourth dimension. Okay, now that brings us to the photon belt. If we realize that the photon belt is light, and I've already said that our bodies are going to be changed into light, what happens to our shadow side and the dark forces here on Earth? Well, their days are numbered. There isn't anybody here upon the planet at this time that you're not going to have to face your shadow side. We, for so long, have, of course, portrayed what we want other people to see. Now, this is my face, and this is what I want you to see, but we've always ignored, and we've kept in a dark secret that other side of us, which is the one I call the shadow side, or the negative side. With the process of light, nothing dark can be hidden, including your shadow self. Whether you like it or not, it will emerge, it will challenge you, and it will cause you to face the reality of it. So that you have to marry up your shall we say, your negative with your positive, your shadow with your light, and be one with the Christ consciousness or the incoming Christ consciousness. So your shadow self and the things that you've hidden for so long will no longer be, because they have to be ratified, not ratified, but radically changed, and they have to be transformed so that they too can be of the light. There is nothing at this point in time that can resist the incoming Christ consciousness, which of course is the ultimate light to change all things. The planet right now, worldwide, is beginning to experience very negative things, and when people look at this, they say, well, how could this possibly be? You're talking about light. You're talking about the guardian forces. You're talking about the Christ. And yet when I look around me, all I see is negativity. Well, what you have to realize is these are the last throes of the negative forces. They are through. They know they're through. But they're going to get their final licks in as much as they can before they go. And of course, that's all part of the game, you see, and indeed it is a game. And so they're going to do their utmost to derail as many of us as they possibly can, so that we will not be successful in graduating from the third dimension into the fourth and fifth, and also being able to enter into the light of the photon belt and being one with the Christ once again. So these dire things which you're seeing throughout the whole world, whether it be the wars in Yugoslavia and the many other countries which I previously mentioned, they're all part of the divine scenario. Do not give it import. Do not give it fear. Do not give it judgments and what have you. Know that it's okay as part of a divine plan. But the key player in the whole thing, and this great show and this great stage play that we're experiencing here on planet Earth right now, of course, is you. You must distinguish between what is reality and what is illusion. You must accept either one. That's your free will. And I'll tell you what, they will not interfere with your free will, because your free will is the most sacred thing you have, and even they, as great as they are, cannot and will not interfere with your free will. So we have some decisions to make. No longer can we sit on the fence. No longer can we hide in our shadow self. No longer can the dark forces, of course, control us and destroy us unless we want them to. Again, that is our free will, if you will. Okay, we mentioned darkness, we mentioned negativity, and we said earlier, you know, that when we were explaining the photon belt, the graphic illustrations on the board up there, I said there was 10,500 years of darkness. In other words, it's a cycle which we must go through before we can enter the 2,000 years of light. Now, as I also explained, there are two of those, two cycles of 10,500 years. And, of course, these things, particularly the 10,500 years, are designed to control us and to keep us in negativity, and to keep us in darkness, to keep us enslaved and in bondage, which we have been for 10,500 years. But at the end of every 10,500 year era or period, there's a chance to break out of this. And if we have, of course, done what we're supposed to do, then we can break out of it and, of course, go into the light once again, or the golden age, and go on into the fourth and fifth and beyond dimensions. Now, the 10,500 years, of course, is, you might say that's the embodiment of the negative or darker forces. We, of course, are the gods. They're not. And we mustn't look upon them as being bad. They're not. They're nothing more than a divine instrument to test us as the gods that we are. Each one of us, of course, as I told you earlier, is a god, although we are gods in amnesia at this time. But we have come down here voluntarily, believe it or not, to experience all of these negative things that we're experiencing. There's only one planet in the whole solar system like us, and that is planet Earth. Planet Earth was chosen and agreed to be the habitat, if you will, of all negativity. God uses us, and of course the greater forces uses us as an experimental planet to experience negativity. And only the most the strong, the most advanced, the most intrepid of gods can come down here and experience this, you know. When you leave here and you go into the fourth and fifth dimension, you will jump grades ahead of your contemporaries. You know, the average God cannot come down here and experience the things that you are experiencing or have experienced in the past. They were frightened to do it. They didn't want to come. But we, as the volunteers that we are, we came down to experience this negativity so that we, as a result of these great lessons that we're learning through the negative aspects of life here upon the planet, that we could then go back into the light and teach others about the foibles and, of course, the truths and untruths, of course, of what we know as negativity. So that points up another thing, too, about our planet. We are very special. There's only one like us. And we, of course, are playing a very divine role, enabling spirit, if you will, to experience negativity. There's an old saying, which I use quite often in Europe when I'm lecturing, and I say that, you know, I'm not a human being having a spiritual experience. I'm spirit having a human experience, and that's really what it's all about, you see. We as spirit, we as gods that we are, we chose to come down here and experience these negative things which we have, of course, lifetime after lifetime. So there's a divine purpose behind it all. Realize, too, that the negative forces are God just as much as the forces of light are God. Each one of them, of course, chose the role they would play this time around, and they've done it, and they've done it well. Okay, let's go on to our next reference then. We are, of course, being directed indirectly, subliminally, if you will, by a higher force and source. And, of course, the greatest of the source is the one we know as the Creator, the divine Creator. Others, of course, that more appropriate and nearer to us at this time would be, of course, the Christ. We are being directed by the Christ Council, by the current Christ, who is Maitreya. And, of course, as the instruments that we are of them, we are experiencing for them this great transformational process which we're experiencing right now. Okay. Let's go on to another question now. Has often been asked, as we become attuned to the energies of the photon belt, is physical death still necessary? No, it is not. As you change your body of corporeality from density to light, then death no longer holds sway over you, you see. And because if you enter the light, there is no such thing as death. Remember what I said. I said death was taught to us by those who put us here. They, of course, did that to control us and to recycle us. This sounds pretty crass, but it's really the truth. They chose death as a disposal, as something to basically recycle us and to control us, you know, over the millenniums. And, of course, they're saying really to themselves, even though they do these dire things to us, someday maybe the little turkeys will get it right, you know, and they will go home. Well, we're in that process right now, you know, of discovering who we really are, that we are gods in amnesia, that, of course, we're in a contrived world which was designed to enslave us and to keep us in bondage, but it's about to enter now. And for those of us, of course, who can accept the incoming Christ consciousness, there will be no such thing as physical death. For those who cannot, of course, as I mentioned earlier, they will go to that alternate planet, and at that time they will experience physical death, and of course they will be recycled once again on the new planet Earth here to come here in the third dimension. Okay, so no, there will be no physical death unless, of course, you choose it. In other words, the way you choose that, though, is not to accept the incoming Christ consciousness, so that the transformational processes which are necessary for you to become the light take place. Okay, another question. Will all persons be permitted to enter the photon belt? And if not, what happens to those who can't or won't? Well, I've already touched upon that, earlier. I said those who cannot will be taken to an alternate planet, which is presently in the fourth dimension. As we proceed from the third dimension into the fourth dimension, remember what I said? I said we're going up and they are coming down. As we go up, that alternate planet comes down, and of course they will experience the very things that we're doing right now. Okay, thank you. So, now, will all persons be permitted to enter the photon belt? And the answer is no. Again, I've said it obliquely time and time again, that if we can be of the Christ consciousness, if we can accept the incoming Christ consciousness, yes, we will enter the photon belt. But there are many on the planet right now who do not want to acknowledge that there is such a thing as the Christ consciousness, that there is such a thing as light, that there is such a thing as a higher force. They're being ruled by the negative aspects, which of course they have come to believe to be reality, when indeed it is illusion. There are so many people here right now on our planet Earth who are so busy doing other things that they don't have time for God. And of course, that's one of the greatest difficulties we have upon the planet right now, is that we have turned our backs on God. Somebody said, now look, I don't have time for that nonsense. Junior's in college and I'm too busy making a living and so forth. Those things I have to wait. Well, let me tell you something. There is no waiting anymore. You either do it or you don't, because the time and the end times are near. So you have to decide in the relatively near future, and it'd be best if you do it right now, whether you're going to be a part of the graduation ceremony, whether or not you're going to accept the incoming Christ consciousness, or do you wish to live in the old archaic, destructive world that we have been involved in for so long? Of course, the choice is yours. Remember what I said, free will dictate what it is that you will do. Now, as you listen to this video and this tape, let me remind you that there are 4 billion of you out there who will not make it. Now, the question is that you? Now, there's another 2 billion that will make it. We say 2 billion. Right now, it's pinpointed at 1.5 billion who will graduate into the higher dimensions. But I do believe sincerely, and the Bible also states this in Zechariah, it states that 1/3 of the population at the given time will, of course, graduate into the higher dimensions. Well, 1/3 of 6 billion, of course, is 2 billion. And so, as I said, there will be 2 billion people who are destined to make it at this point in time. I've already explained to you, too, for those who cannot accept the incoming Christ consciousness, they will not enter the photon belt. They will go into a repository planet, the alternate planet Earth, which I mentioned earlier. There they will go into a deep sleep, and then later on they will be reintroduced into Earth again to enact the whole scenario, the 10,500 years once again. All of this is in accordance with universal law, and of course there is a law called the law of retribution. Jesus said it much more simply. He said, what you sow, you shall reap. So that's retribution. You see, if you sow wheat, you get wheat. If you sow weeds, you get weeds, and so forth. If you sow violence, you get violence. Right now, we are facing the harvest of what we have created over the millenniums, you see. And all of this has to be, of course, resolved before we actually enter the photon belt. So I'm sorry to say that no, everybody will not enter the photon belt, that they will have to recycle and do it over again. But let me remind you, too, that God never loses anything. Eventually, each and every person here upon this planet will make it. That is a promise. Some of us will make it quicker than others. You know, how many times have each one of you in the audience here, or the viewers out there, how many times have you gone around this wheel and this cycle that we're talking about right now called the photon belt? Innumerable times we've all done it. But hopefully, I would say that we have it right now, and that we will go on into the higher and better things, of course, of consciousness. Okay, let's go to the next question then. This one is often asked in Europe. What can we expect as we personally enter the photon belt? Well, the phenomena of, say, going from the third dimension into the fourth dimension, which of course is the photon belt, is anonymous to sticking your finger in a 110 socket in the wall, you know. You get quite a jolt. It won't kill you, but there is a complete transformational immediate process that takes place in your body when that happens. Anything from an ouchie to maybe getting a little bit sick. So the entrance into the belt itself is not that severe. But again, unless you are in accord with those energies, which are the Christ energies, which again is epitomized in the photon belt, you will, of course, be rejected, you know. If the voltage is 110 and you're only pooping along at 105, well, you can't expect to make it, you know. And you're going to short circuit, and of course then you will be separated, just as the wheat is from the tares, as Jesus said, and of course you will go to that alternate planet. Okay, let's go on to the next thing that we can expect as we go into the photon belt. It is said that there will be 3.5 to 5 days of total darkness. Now, it's speculated that this will happen in two ways. One, that if the sun goes in first, there will be immediate darkness. In other words, 3.5, and some people even say six days, but 3.5 to 5 days, I think, is a norm, where we will be in total darkness. There's not going to be illumination of the moon, the stars, and all the things that we take for granted now. When I say total darkness, I mean total darkness. Now, those will be scary times for many. But remember this, that fear is controlling, and if you wish to be a part of the graduation ceremony, you must let go of fear. As you go into these 3.5 to 5 days, the whole heavens will seem to transform and change. It'll be actually frightening. The stars will be seemingly falling out of the sky, and people will expect them to crash with Earth or hit upon their person and what have you. There'll be no sun and no moon. The stars, as they fall away from the heavens, of course, will then, of course, disappear, and we will not see them for 3.5 to 5 days. And then when we emerge from this, we come into total light. So there's a marvelous transformational process, of course, which is going to take place at this time. It's going to be very frightening to many, of course. And but again, we can look upon it as a final warning by the divine, you know, to either be or not to be a part of the graduation ceremony and the 2,000 years of light and love and balance and all the things, which, of course, are representative of the fourth and fifth dimension. Okay. When do we physically enter the belt? Well, we're already into it right now. Remember what I said? I said that it began back in 1962 when it was discovered scientifically. And so we're already into it, and increasingly, of course, its eminence is beginning to affect us more and more. We're really looking at the end of physicality and, of course, the beginning of our light body. As the number who will make it, you know, I've already talked about that. It's estimated that 2 billion will make it and ultimately will make it. But Zechariah chapter 13, verse 8, and I think it's lines 1 and 3, actually say that 2/3 will not make it, 1/3 will. All right. Is this, another question, is this world reality or illusion? Now, I'm talking about our world. Our world, I've already said, is illusion, is not reality. It's what we accept as reality, but indeed it is illusion. We're looking at the wrong side of the mirror. As we enter and near, I should say, the photon belt, what we're looking at is the gradual turning around of the mirror so that we perceive the true side of reality as opposed to the false side of reality, which we have come to think of course, as truth and truthful reality. Now, the object of this planet and its negativity, of course, was designed strictly for this. This is like an experimental planet. What happens if we separate from self? Okay? So when we are put down here, when we're contrived and orchestrated and controlled by those who put here, they purposely cause us to forget self. They purposely cause us to forget that indeed we are gods. They purposely cause us to stop us from knowing where we came from. So the whole ball of wax, you see, is contrived to separate you and I from our true self, our God self. And we all must admit that they've done a superb job in the past, in deluding us into believing that we're something other than we are. And that, of course, is called the separation from self. So all of us and I mentioned earlier, we have to take a look at our shadow side along with our good side. And, of course, that is the discovery of self. Okay, is the photon belt physical? No, it's spiritual and etheric. And I think that answers itself. It's spiritual and etheric. Is the photon belt an instrument of divine evolution? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. I've expounded it ever since I've sat here. It's designed, it's a divine instrument designed to be a sorting out process. How many are ready to reach for the light, to enter the light, and how many are not? It's a gathering of mature souls, if you will, who have reached a point of realization and evolution where they now can say, look, all of this has been a game. It's over. I know who I am now. Indeed, I am a God. It's time to go home, and I want to go home. And that's basically what we're looking at right here. Although the world will be in total chaos, as you will learn later on, we get into some divine things which I'm portending for the future, there will be much stabilization. From the surface, it will look very chaotic. From the surface, it will look almost impossible. But what that actually represents is a stabilization period, you see. We have to get rid of the old and archaic, the unsettled, and the undefined and so forth, in order to bring about a stabilization or maturity. And that is a period which we're going through right now. All right, now let's go to another question. What is the divine key to successfully enter or pass through the photon belt? What is the divine key? And of course, it's the key to enter the fourth and fifth dimension. Well, all things in God's universe is simple. Simplicity is God's byword. We are the ones who muck it up. He gives us something so simple, and I'll be damned if we don't make it so contrived and complicated that we lose our ability to understand what we have created into something very negative and far out. Okay, the only thing you need to be a part of the graduation ceremony, to enter the fourth or fifth dimension, to be a part of the incoming Christ consciousness and the Christ consciousness itself, and incidentally, it is said that we will experience the second coming of the Christ. It was up there on the board. It is said that we go into the fifth dimension the year 2005. Well, that's also the year that the lost books of the Bible state that the Christ will make its second coming. But the big mistake is that everybody thinks he will come back here in the physical again, and they will see him in the physical, and that's not where it is at all. You have to be of the like consciousness in other words, in the fifth dimension. You will have to go through the fourth dimension into the fifth dimension, reach the year 2005, and done so successfully if you are to witness the second coming of the Christ. It's not a physical thing. If he came back here again, I'm sure that we'd do the same thing we did to him before. Okay. All right, let's go to the next question then. We will enter the photon belt at a speed of 208,000 miles an hour plus. And assuming that Earth traverses space normally at an estimated 18,000, what we're looking at this point in time is an acceleration of 190,800 miles per hour. Now, let's just stop for a moment and think about that. What is that going to do to the planet, and what's that going to do specifically to our bodies? If we're only moving, pooping along at 18,000 miles per hour through space right now, and we're going to increase that by 190,800,000 in the very near future, don't you think that adjustments have to be made? Don't you think that the body has to be realigned? And the answer to that, of course, is yes. With a greater speed, there's going to be greater compression. If there's more density, then compression, of course, will short circuit, and it will kill you instantly. So the body has to assimilate these incoming accelerated energies in such a way that it can accommodate these energies, you see, and be one with them. So even at that point, as the planet is moving at 190,800 miles an hour more, so will our bodies. Now, what that portends is simply this, that our chakra systems have to be realigned. The DNA strands will run probably from the 2 that it has right now to somewhere between 12 and 13 strands, you see. Our whole atomical structure, of course, will have to be sped up so that there will be more atoms and greater in speed. The chakras, of course, will go from the 7 that we have right now, and they probably, too, will go into somewhere between 12 and 13 major chakras. Now, it doesn't include all of them because there's hundreds and hundreds of chakras even in our body right now, some in the physical, of course, but the others out into the etheric. So there will be great transformational changes taking place in the body, and the body has to be able to align in such a way to, of course, accommodate not only the incoming Christ consciousness, but also to accommodate the accelerated speed. So that gives you some idea of what's going to happen. Another thing, too, which would be of interest is that the pineal gland, right now the pineal gland's about the size of a pea, common little pea, And in this accelerated process and transformational process which is taking place, it will go back to its original state, which will be about the size of a quarter. Now that means then that everybody on the planet, if they can accommodate these incoming energies, of course, will then become seers, great seers. People we think are great today, they'll be commonplace when all this transformational process happens. Everybody will be clairvoyant. Everybody will be clairaudient. Everybody will be clairsentient, and on, you see. And will be just like the great master we all knew as Jesus, who had the ability to see and to hear, in other words, audiosentient, to hear, and will be great healers, and we'll all be masters. Now, we are masters anyway, but we're masters in amnesia, once again, as we are gods in amnesia. Okay, this great transformational process, which, of course, is related directly to the speed up of time and space and realization, of course, if it's going to affect the body, then it stands to reason it also has to affect the planet. And this, of course, heralds what we know as the coming Earth changes. There will be intense, rapid global changes taking place on our planet, and also concurrent with that, of course, in our consciousness, in the now. Now, as all of these things happen, get ready to hang on, because things are going to be dramatic, Again, if you wish to be spared the adversities of the coming Earth changes, again, you must resort to what I said earlier, the simplicities of God, and they are simply this. Here's the solution to ridding yourself of all negativity. Here's the solution to pass through the astral belt, the lower astral and what have you, with impunity. Here's the secret to being able to graduate and be a part of the Christ consciousness, and also, of course, of the Photon Belt. It's simply this. Learn to walk in love and light and balance. Learn to walk in love and light and balance. Learn to love yourself and learn to love others. Learn to forgive yourself and to forgive others. If you can do those things, of course, you will be a part of the graduation ceremony. See how simple it is? There's really no great major thing that you must change. What we're talking about, of course, is becoming one with the Christ again and becoming one with God again. They are, of course, love and light and balance. It is often said by myself, and I've heard others say it too, that God is love and love is God. So if you are in the posture and the realization and practice of love, then, of course, all things are going to be how shall we say, in harmony for you. So those simple things I've just given you is the secret to the future. Now, the other thing along with that, when you love and you forgive and you walk in love and light and balance, is to rid yourself of fear. Fear is an absence of God. It's an absence of trust in God. If you fear something, you are fearing the negative side of you, you say. And the negative side, although it's an oblique part of God, it is designed to control you and to keep you in bondage. The only thing that you have to gain, well, I'll put it another way. What's the most real part in you? And it's a simple little thing called a spark of divinity. That little spark of divinity, which rests in your soul, is the only real thing about you. That body you sit in and you call mind, is a vehicle only. It's a vehicle which, of course, is designed to enable you to do God's work while you're here, or to complete the mission, whatever it is that you chose to be here. And if you, in the process of fulfilling your mission here upon earth, if you through well-designed or even inadvertently have to drop that body, that vehicle which you chose to operate it down here, it's okay, because it's not real. It is illusion. Now, I better qualify something I said there, sort of could be rather frightening. You do not choose upon yourself to destroy your body. That is in a sense, if there is a sin, that is one of them. If you destroy your body before you have completed your mission here, you're going to have to come back and do it again, There's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you want to cop out early and, you would take your life, against the will of the divine and what have you, that's your choice to do. You have that free will. But just remember this, if you do, you're coming back for another 10,500 years. Now, if in the service of God and in the service of yourself and in the service of the Christ and what have you, the body, of course, gives up, or the body is destroyed and what have you, don't worry about it, because it's the least real part of you. And when you learn to walk through life without fearing, then, of course, all else will take care of itself, because God is love and love is God. Okay, let's go to another question. Will the earth changes be part of the accelerated change? And, of course, I've already said that. It will be. There will be volcanoes erupting. There will be, of course, earthquakes. There will be tidal waves or tsunamis. There will be drastic and destructive weather patterns, whether it be tornadoes or cyclones or what have you. And all of these, basically, as we're experiencing them right at this very moment throughout the world, all climatic conditions, of course, have changed. They're the prelude, if you will, to the coming earth changes. This is a signal. They're waving a flag at it and say, you better get ready. It's coming, you see. Now, there's an interesting aspect of that, too, and I won't go into it in great depth, but it's in one of my tapes called What NASA Didn't Tell Us About the Moon. And in this tape, I inform you that there is a force upon the moon, who, of course, are the guardian forces. They're the good ETs, who are actually precipitating these climatic earth changes that we're having right now. In other words, these weather conditions, which are so abnormal, they are being orchestrated from the moon. And the way they are doing this, of course, the moon is not a fixed object as we suppose it to be. The moon is artificial. The moon was actually driven into our solar system roughly 12,000 years ago. It is the core of an ancient planet called Maldek. It was after Maldek was destroyed, which was Lucifer's planet. They reconditioned it, and they drove it in here about the time of Noah's Ark, at the time of the great deluge, It's mentioned up there on the chart, you see. The old moon was pulled out. The new moon was driven into our solar system, pre-positioned here for an express purpose, and that purpose is now coming into realization. The realization is that they will affect the earth changes from the moon. Now, these are the guardian forces. These are not the negative forces doing that. The earth has to be cleansed before it can ascend into the higher realms. All of this negativity and all the abominable things which we have created while we're here on the planet, these things, of course, just like our bodies, have to undergo a transformational process in order to be able to accommodate the incoming Christ consciousness. Our planet is a living organism. It is feminine in aspect and nature, and she will undergo these transformational changes. Now, there's a key note here, too, which I should mention. The planet will graduate with or without you. It's your choice. It will go. If you choose to be a part of it, hooray, I hope you do. But if you don't, forget it. You're going to leave this planet, you're going to go to that alternate planet, and you're going to come back here and do it again. It's just that simple. and hopefully the next time you will make it. Okay, let's go to the next question then. Is the government aware of the spiritual context of the photon belt? Of course they are. They know it from a scientific point of view. They also know it very intricately and intimately from a spiritual point of view too. But because of the illusion which they live in, and they have been contrived, I should say, to perpetrate. When I say contrived, I'm saying this is not their free will. I'm saying that they have been directed and controlled by another consciousness, extraterrestrial in nature, which of course has caused them to do and be the things that they are. Now they are the representation of us, but these organizations of control, of course, are designed by the Wormwood people, that extraterrestrial intelligence who put us here. We can begin with the unseen, or the unseen government, the Illuminati. And then we come down to world governments, and each one of these, all of these things, of course, are designed to control and to dupe us and to keep us in bondage. Now, the Mayan calendar states, of course, speaking of government, that government, science, and religion will collapse if they cannot accept incoming Christ consciousness. And, of course, we're seeing it happen all over. Look at the greatest thing that has happened, great, of course, in terms of governments and the prophecies. Look what happened to the Soviet Union overnight. Now, here was the second greatest nation in the world, and all of a sudden it was nothing. It was reduced to ashes, just like the Phoenix Fire was, And they're still struggling, so, but there's more of that to come. That was a warning. Look at the Berlin Wall when it came down. Another unforeseen thing, you see. Of course, this is the divine having his way, and is going to have his way with or without us, and most certainly it will, of course, eradicate and remove the forces of darkness. But going back to that original question, yes, the government is fully aware of the spiritual aspects, of course, of the process of the photon belt and going into it. Another question that follows that many times is, are they knowingly manipulating fear against and in the masses? And of course the answer to that is, once again, yes. They too are being manipulated by the forces who put us here, so they in turn turn around and manipulate us, hoping to control us, keep us in fear, and keep us from looking at the true reality of God Himself. Now fear, and this is very important, I want to impress this upon your minds very strongly. Fear is the food for the forces of darkness. This is how they have controlled us. This is how they control us for the 10,500-year periods, because they keep us in constant fear. And this fear, of course, is the element of control which they need in order to keep us from graduating and going home to our rightful place of origin. Are there those who now and in the future will help us through these transitional periods? And the answer to that, of course, and I'm talking, of course, about the coming earth changes, all the things which are going to be adverse in nature. Is there someone who is going to help us with all this? And the answer is yes. There is going to be, let's call them a family of light, extraterrestrial in nature. They will come down here and they will, of course, help us remove the fear, which, of course, is the control element of the planet. They represent a family of love, light, and balance. They have our best interests at heart. They want us to succeed. The negative forces, of course, do not. They want us to stay here so they control us, and they can feed off of their food, our nemesis, of course, called fear. So they don't want us to leave. But the family of love is soon to come in, and they will come in the way of mass landings, extraterrestrial mass landings. These will begin, I would prophesize that they will begin probably in the fall of 1995, and most certainly will go through all of 1996. These forces, these mass landings of extraterrestrials, will be designed to restore the light and stability and all the things, of course, which are needed to ensure the process of the planet from the third dimension into the fourth and fifth and into the photon belt. Now, I made some other notes on this, but I think I'll mention it right now. There are already ETs amongst us. They have been born, and they have been raised by human beings, and they look like human beings for the most part. Even their parents don't recognize them. But at the right time, they will step forward and say, here I am. Now, many of them are one half extraterrestrial and one half human. But they realize their extraterrestrial role as a guardian force here upon Earth. And this year, beginning this year, more and more of them will begin to emerge and put in an appearance, and it will be younger people for the most part. And we will realize all of a sudden that they are here. The forces of light are here. Then, of course, they'll be the emissaries, if you will, and they will be the precursors, if you will, of the greater forces that are to follow, the mass landings here upon the planet. Now, why would they come in mass? Well, there's several different reasons. For one thing, there's going to be a pole shift. Now, I'm not talking about the north-south axis as it's done in the past. This planet has flipped its axis in the past over 330 times. There will be a change in the polarities, but not in the way that we would presuppose. The Earth will, as it goes through its acceleration, is going to change the electromagnetic field. And when the electromagnetic field begins to change, then the magnetic poles will change. And what is going to happen this time, rather than the planet flipping its axis, as is done so often in the past, and it was orchestrated and perpetrated by the Wormwood people, what's going to happen this time is that there will be a reversal of the poles, the magnetic poles, if you will. Whereas we go clockwise now, the reversal will again cause us to go counterclockwise. And if you'll notice, that's in consonance, of course, with the rotation of the planetary system, the solar system, around the central sun, Alcyon. So we're going back then, in this shift, we'll be going back into our true reality. The mirror at that point in time, of course, would have been turned around so that we can really see and perceive who we really are. There again, we have a choice, you know, can we accept it or can we not? Now, that it's all of this, the Earth changes, the changing of the poles and so forth is going to wreak havoc. There's going to be mass chaos, government will collapse, science will collapse, religion will collapse, the economy will collapse, finances will collapse. All of these are old and archaic systems which must go. And of course, as they go, hopefully, if we are in line for it, something else, of course, will replace it, which, of course, is beneficent and more to our liking and our needs. For those of us who, of course, during these chaotic times, who stand and live and walk and talk in fear, forget it. You're not going to survive. You'll become a victim of destruction one way or another. Could be a roving band of brigands who are going throughout the world, you know, looting and raping, such as they did in Rwanda and these many other places. We got that coming up on mass scales, you know. But again, if you are centered in love and light and balance, you have nothing to worry about. Just remember those things I said. Walk in love and light and balance. Learn to forgive yourself and others. Learn to love yourself and others. That's your key home. That's your ticket home. You don't have to worry. I am going to be publishing a book that I printed in 1980 called Citizens Alert, and it's about low-profile survival. And I want to add a couple more chapters to that to update it. But it recommends survival by walking again and living again in love and light and balance as a system to survive, you know. In the book, the only time that you resort to something which might be termed violence would be an absolute necessity. But if you do, as I tell you in the book, if you walk and live and talk in love and light and balance, you can be invisible, because when you do that, you see, you're one with the Christ consciousness, and you'll be invisible to the rampaging violent forces that will be roaming the face of the earth at that time. I've done it, you know, and I've had people walk right by me. I've had animals walk up to me and not see me or sense me. When you're in the light and you're one with God and you're one with the Christ, you are safe. Okay, let's go on to another question then. We were talking about the monastic radiation. The monastic radiation is really nothing more than the radiation of the Christ. It is glowing. It is radiant. It's a time that we can realize that. Well, put it another way, if we can accept the incoming Christ consciousness and the monastic radiation, which is the emanation of the Christ itself, then there'll be no more death or disease or time or aging or pain or sorrow or crying. All the things that we take for granted right now as being real will not come to pass because they are illusion. Our Bible tells us that. In fact, if you go to Revelations 21, that was chapter 21, verse 4, it openly states that in the coming times, if you're one with the Christ, you will have experienced none of these things, whether it be death or pain or sorrow or any of the things which, of course, we have accepted as being the truth in the past. Hidden things no longer can be hidden. I've already touched upon that. That's a question, again, often asked. But let's go into some other aspect here. When we enter the fourth dimension, what happens to us and what happens to our thoughts? In this transformational process, the body, the physical body, if you will, the body of corporeality, becomes unreal. What is going to be real in terms of you are your thoughts. Your thoughts are real right now. Every time you have a thought, and you say, well, secretly you'll say to yourself, I hate her, or I sure would like to take her to bed, or I would like to do this and that. And nobody hears it, and that's me, nobody knows it. Like heck. It's like shooting an arrow from a bow. The minute you say that and do it, it goes zing! And it either will go to the person or it will go up in repository and wait for you to deal with it later on. It's like the chickens coming home to roost, And if you've had these bad thoughts, as we all have in the past, because we didn't know any better, they, of course, are being held in abeyance for us, and we're going to have to deal with them. Now, when you get into the fourth dimension, there is no more game playing. If for instance, if Roger and I are facing one another, and Roger has something, diverse or even adverse to say about me, the minute that he thinks it, I see it, because it's like looking upon a TV screen, It's right there before me. He can't hide anything. I can't hide anything from him. So what you are then is what you think. And if you think wrong, bye-bye, because unless you change it immediately and ask for forgiveness, and you transform it immediately on the spot, it can cause you to come back to the third dimension and create it all over again. In that world is absolute truth. You are the light. You are one with the Christ. The Christ in God doesn't lie. It doesn't cheat. It doesn't control. It doesn't judge, and all those things. So you're going to have to be constantly at one in atonement, of course, with the Christ and with God, or you are going to short circuit and you will come back to this third dimensional reality once again. Now, there's a consciousness which we're all going through right now, and it's called, there's even books on it, and there's teachings. I see more and more of this coming about right now, but called super consciousness, super learning, super consciousness. Well, there's something to that, Super consciousness will lead to the God consciousness. That's one way of doing it. Of course, the greatest way to lead to God consciousness, of course, is through prayer and meditation, and, of course, through what I said earlier, love, light, and balance. All of those things, of course, will get us in immediate connection with God and the bliss of the oneness with the Creator, or the God I am, if you will, and will also give us the entree into the golden age, which, of course, is the photon belt or the monastic ray or radiation. All right. Now, another question which is often asked of me, is the Earth special? You bet it is. We are the most important thing going right now. If you remember when I was talking about the Confederation of Planets, I said everything hinges upon us. Without us, there will be no graduation. So everything, of course, depends upon what we do or we don't do, and for that reason, we are very special. Our planet is an advanced learning school for gods. Each one of us, as I told you earlier, is a god, And we're down here, of course, to learn about to learn the lessons of negativity here upon the planet. And our planet, as I've already pointed out to you, is a repository for negativity. It's a special learning lesson for we gods, and a special learning lesson, of course, for the Creator God and the Christ while we're here upon the planet. Okay, let's go to another question now. Of course, the question is asked, how do we survive? Well, I've already told you that. We have to learn to love ourselves and others, forgive, learn to dispense with fear, and that's a very important one. Because what we fear, now get this, what we fear, we reject. And you might be rejecting an absolute truth, which you need, you see, to graduate into the higher dimensions. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Next question. The next chart, please. And we'll take a look at another question, if you will. Thank you. You know by now that we have a prompt in here. But I wanted to make sure, what I did, I compiled these questions of people throughout Europe and, of course, the world, mail-ins and what have you, and we have them more or less in sequential order. And so please bear with us at this point. We were talking about, of course, fear. We were talking about rejection. And this is something very important for you to remember, too. If we reject, we make a judgment. And if you make a judgment, that is a control. If you make a judgment, that is an integral part of negativity. And, of course, it excludes you from the divine ascension. Because these are one of the things that we have to learn, is to stop judging others, Now, we've been taught to do that from childhood. The day we came out of the womb, had our little fanny spanked, or our little pinkies, twitched or whatever to make us mind. And all these things are basically negative in aspect. I like to see mothers today. They're so full of love with their children. It's rare that they punish them in any way. They talk to them, they love them, and what have you. And I was in the restaurant this morning watching a young family with their children, and I was really impressed with what I saw and how they treated their children. I tell my own children, I said, you're far better parents than I ever thought of being, really. They are good parents, these young people today. Okay, I think that's about it. Let's look at one more there, George, and see what's behind that. Gods and amnesia, we've covered that. Okay. Describe briefly what is expected of us collectively and individually. I think I've already done that. As we approach the Photon Belt, and we've done that. What can we do to prepare for all this? Well, again, remember what I said. The simplicity of it all is to learn to walk in love and light and balance, to learn not to judge, to learn not to fear, to be able to forgive yourself and others, to be able to love yourself and love others. And remember what I said, too. I said that love is God and God is love. There's your whole scenario in two simple phrases, you see. So there's an array and, of course, an address, if you will, of some of the most common questions asked throughout the world in terms of the Photon Belt. I have one or two here which we might go ahead and inject. I think some of them are redundant because I already talked about them, but let me look here quickly and see if there's anything else that should be, of course, brought to your attention. We were talking about mass landings, and of course, again, this is rather redundant, but yes, there will be mass landings, 95, 96 on. Elements, or you might say the vanguard of all this, are already amongst us. They are in human form. Many of them are half ET and half human, but there are many, many different colonies here on Earth who are already ensconced and who are waiting for these mass landings. I discovered two of these colonies in the 70s, one of them in 70, another one in 1980. Here in 1975 in Arizona, I discovered a hidden community here in Arizona, in around Wickenburg, Arizona. And then a few years later, I discovered another extraterrestrial community in Northern California. So I have had occasion to discover two of them, and I know there's many, many more. Most times you will find them in redoubt areas such as, of course, mountains, basically inaccessible. But they're here in great numbers, and they're ready to emerge in the very near future. I've always said the government will collapse unless they can accept the incoming Christ consciousness. Expect all financial institutions to collapse. They will. But out of that, of course, will emerge a new system which will be beneficent to mankind. We've talked about chaos and disorder due to the collapse of illusion. There will be tremendous emotional disorder. We can expect insurgency. We can expect the zealots and what have you to want to take over the government in its periods of weakness, and they would hope to be the government. These things, of course, are going to come to our realization, which again is why you must always stay centered and balanced and one with God. Indian prophecy states that 1996 there will be a mass migration from this planet to that alternate planet we were originally talking about, and that will, of course, continue up to 1999. So when we stop and think of the earth changes and what have you, there will be great destruction, both of bodies and souls and other physicalities. And, of course, these people, if they're not of the incoming Christ consciousness, will go to that alternate planet that we were talking about. Okay, there will be, I think this one's very important, there will be an admission in the very near future by all world government that the ETs, that they have been working with the ETs, not the right ones for the last 50 years, that they have finally broken the yoke of oppression and that now they are ready to receive the incoming mass landings of the good ETs, which will take place sometime this year and also through 1996. Enter the good guys, and of course the government has no alternative at this point. They're going to have to go along with the good guys because they're going to be the force to reckon with. And they will take over the planet, and they will bring it into its final fruition and bring us into a successful process of leaving the third dimension and entering into the fourth and fifth. We've already talked about the shifting the magnetic poles. Here's an interesting one. Colors and shapes previously unknown will begin to manifest in the sky and in landscape. When we see this, it's a true indication that we're about to enter the fourth dimension. So keep your eyes open there. Many of us in our meditation are already perceiving the fourth dimension. We're seeing into it. And more this, of course, is going to be experienced in the very near future. There will be a major sexual revolution throughout the planet. And it's going to go from a very animalistic stage to a godly application of sexual love. Many people, of course, are experiencing that right now throughout the world. I'm noticing it very strongly in Europe. Many people are now searching for their twin flames. And of course, that's a book that I'm yet to complete, but I've got about halfway complete. I hope to complete this year when I have more time to do it. But I talk about that more and more. And it has to do with the sexual revolution, which I'm talking about. In other words, there's such a thing as sex and there's such a thing as sexuality. Sexuality, of course, is the spiritual aspect of sex, if you will. And, of course, sex is very godly in nature if it is practiced right. It is said that there will be mass radiation due to the transformational changes which are taking place. And there is a large threat that all nuclear reactors and also the redundant weapons, which they have, of course, put aside in storage and so forth, are most likely to explode if something in the form of intervention is not made. The mass landings of the UFOs will be, I know this to be true, will be to circumvent the explosion of those nuclear elements, because if they were to all go, they would blow this planet to smithereens. They will not allow that, and they cannot allow it, as I told you earlier, because it is essential that we graduate and join the Confederacy of Planets so that we all can go, as the sisters and brothers that we are, into the fourth and fifth dimension. I've already mentioned that there will be major transformations, of course, in the DNA strands, in our chakras, our atoms, our molecules, and everything else. So we're going to go through a complete overhaul and transformation on all levels of consciousness, including our physicality. We spoke about the reversal of the polarities. Here's one that's very important, which I almost forgot, and I'm glad I pulled out these little cards to see if there's anything I missed. Ironically, they were all covered for the most part, but here's one that was not covered. A new location of the central sun. Now, for eons, we've had this central sun, of course, in the Pleiades. But the Pleiades have not always been the most benevolent towards us, you see. And there's an element in the Pleiades constellation who has not had our best interests at heart in the past. Because of this, it is said that the central sun, after this transformational process takes place, and as we proceed through the Photon Belt, the central sun, too, will be changed and will go into a constellation that we know as Sirius. The Sirians are much closer, they have a greater affinity with us than the Pleiades do. The Lyrians and the Pleiades, of course, have been associated with us for a long, long time. I remember years back, 1988, I think it was, when I was asked to be an astral representative for the Contact from the Pleiades project. And I was busy finishing a book at that time called The 12 Women Apostles. And I told the individual that if they'd wait for me to finish the book, then, of course, I'd take a look at what they wanted me to do. And in the process, I got to think, there's something stinky about the Pleiades. I just don't know what it is, but there's something I don't like. I think they're a bunch of phonies. I don't think they're telling us the truth. What happened was I took myself back. I regressed myself, and I went back and back and back. And I'll be darned, I finally ended up in Atlantis in the final days, when the nuclear explosions, of course, had wreaked havoc. These abominable things that were running around, half human and half animal and what have you. It was grotesque. The nuclear fallout had already started, and the presiding government at that time, who turned out to be Palladian, and that shocked me, they as much as said, well, boys, sorry about that, but we're going to have to go home. And those suckers jumped in their little spacecraft and zoomed away, and they left us to our own demise. And if it hadn't have been for ones now known as the Hopi Indians, who were the sacred firekeepers of Atlantis at that time, there would probably not be another civilization here on Earth right at this point. But they said, that is the sacred firekeepers, now the Hopis, said, follow me and I will lead you to safety. For those of us who could trust them, whatever, we followed them. We ended up going into the subterranean earth. We ended up spending 580 years down there before it was safe to emerge from the nuclear fallout, which of course was on the surface of the planet. And of course we came out in Black Mesa, Arrive, where the petroglyph is, of course, of the Hopi prophecy. So based upon that, of course, I told that realization, I told that particular project I did not care to do it. But it confirmed what I had always thought, that there was something not quite right about the Palladians, that they were goody two-shoes, but they weren't being honest with us. And of course, they have not. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this second fireside chat. I hope that I have said something which is meaningful to you. It's a broad brush overview, if you will, of the Photon Belt. And I'm sure that, like me, once I begin to investigate it and delve into it from a spiritual point of view, it made a lot more sense to me of what this phenomena was all about. It is these times, I should say, even though we may be facing some adversity in the future, these times are exciting. We're finally coming into our full realization as the gods that we are. We are successfully turning the mirror around so that we can see the truism of all as opposed to the illusion of all that we have, of course, thought to be reality so often in the past. Remember, this isn't the first time that you've gone through this experience. Each and all of us have gone through this many times in the past. But here again, we are approaching that time and point where we can get ourselves off the wheel of karma, that we can finally turn this illusion around. We can get rid of our body of corporeality. We can accept our divine body, the Christ consciousness body, and we can be one again with God, which of course was our ultimate destination in the first place. Remember too what I said, that we chose to come here. This is a voluntary expedition. You weren't sent here. Now I will say this, you volunteered, but you didn't get here without approval. You know, this time around, each and every one of us needed that stamp A, what do you call it, the grade A stamp of approval, zoom. But also we signed a contract. That contract is inviolate. There's no way you can get out of it. It's certainty. If you agreed to do certain things upon the planet and you didn't do them, then forget it. You're not going to graduate. So take a look at your life and see where you are right now, and see, you know, if you are judgmental, see if you are controlling, see if you are opinionating, see if you're making mass judgments in all of the vehicles of illusion and, of course, control and the darker forces. If you're doing those things, you better correct them just as quickly as you can, because if you don't, then, of course, you will not be a part of the graduation ceremony. All right. Before we close, I think we have just a couple of minutes. Are there any questions from anybody in the audience right now that would, anything that I may not have covered, which you would like to bring up at this time? Okay. Well, then I would like to take this opportunity to once again thank the viewers for allowing me to share the things which I have, hoping that they bring some elucidation and comfort to you in terms of the times ahead. Remember what I said, adversity will be here. The earth changes are inexorable. You can't escape it. But you don't have to be a part and parcel of it if you are one with God and one with the Christ. That choice, of course, is yours. I would ask you to take the message which you've heard today and take it out and share it with others, and act as the messengers, if you will, of our times, to bring other souls into the light, so that reality that's estimated that the 2 billion people will graduate will become a true reality. Right now, of course, we're saying there's 1.5 billion people who are ready, but in the next 5 years, we hope that, as the Bible says in Zechariah, that there will be, of course, 2 billion as opposed to that 1. Hello, this is Virgil Armstrong. What I'm about to do tonight is to present the Photon Belt number 2. So it's the second of the Fireside Chat, which of course, as I told you in the last presentation, is a series of videos which we'll put together in terms of an update on what's happening in the cosmos, you know, from time to time. Since I last saw you, of course, I have had tours again in Europe, I think now 4 tours. I've just come back from Japan, and in this circuit I've learned a great deal more, of course, about the Photon Belt and also about the Merkabah, and the latest, of course, has to do with the new seed of consciousness, and that's what we'll end up with tonight because it's very important. There is a brand new ball game on this planet at this point in time, and anything that we have considered to be realistic in the past is now past. The world of illusion, the world of judgments, and the things that we'll be talking about that you must master, of course, are over. Now, I have to say to you that our planet, as you will see very shortly, is a very, very special planet which was chosen to play the role that it has, of course, over the millenniums. Many people in the past have called our planet a garbage heap, and I've always resented that because I've always known that our planet is something special. I never knew why, but I had an instinctive, intuitive knowing that our planet was something special in the universe. It has now come to that point of realization. And that's what I want to impart to you tonight, because we are so very special. As you saw in the first Photon Belt or fireside chat that had to do with the Photon Belt, I said that the other planets could not proceed into the Photon Belt, let alone the Merkabah, without us. We are the key and the focus to everything that is to happen this moment and in the relatively near future up to the year 2000. Nothing can move without us. We, at this point in time, are the chosen ones. We have been selected millenniums and millenniums, actually eons ago, to play the role that we have for so long. But now that role is over, again, as you will see later on, and we have been elected as a singular entity to be the representative of God in all of its creation. God has used us to play a very special role. Now that role has been for it to experience its shadow or negative side. And you will see later on that there were two principal agents that have played a very important role, over and above us, of course. Now each one of us here on Earth have been hand-selected and chosen to play a part of this divine role. In other words, helping the Creator experience this negative or shadow side. This is why we have all the negativity in this planet, because we are the collectors of negativity for the whole solar system, and possibly for the whole galaxy. We don't know that, but I can definitely say that we are the collectors of negativity on behalf of the Creator in this solar system. So you can see that makes us very special, and singularly it makes us the most important factor in the divine ascension which is taking place at this very moment. Now later on we will have some questions and answers which of course will qualify some of the things that I'm indicating here at this point in time. But this is a basic lead-in of what we will be talking about tonight. An update on the Photon Belt, a brief discussion of the Merkabah, and I say brief because nobody really understands the Merkabah. There are those who do on the planet equate it to sacred geometry, and there is great truth in that. But it's too far complicated, and much too complicated for the average person on the street. And in my venue and in my thinking, unless it's simplified and is equatable and can be received and used by the common man, and then of course I think it's beyond, shall we say, even redemption. And so therefore, for me to equate it in quantical or quantitative terms, I cannot, and I don't think anybody else can, other than say, okay, it's the tetrahedrons and the things that they're saying, in other words, sacred geometry. I'll qualify that more later on. Now, I will say this, that the Photon Belt and the Merkabah are combined. In other words, they're one. The two energies, of course, are intermixed. One cannot succeed without the other. One is no less important than the other, but as you will learn later on, the Merkabah is the vehicle which will take us, in reality, into the Photon Belt. So, with that brief introduction, what I'd like to do is to go to the board and have a review, if you will, of the Photon Belt procession, which we're in right now. And of course, it's been a year or so since we did the first Fireside Chat 2. So there's been a tremendous forward sweep at this time, and these are the things that I wish to introduce to begin with before we talk about the other subjects. So let's present the board at this time and talk from the board, if you will. Okay, now we talked about the chart, a review of the chart in the Photon Belt, which of course is here. We'll begin here on this side, which would be my left side, and then we'll progressively come over here and end up with this before we go into the next sequence. Now, as I said, the Photon Belt, which of course, as you see here, PB represents the Photon Belt. And here in the very middle of this circle, this supposedly circle, which I drew, which isn't too circular, but nonetheless it depicts what we're talking about. This brown dot you see here is the central sun called Alcyone, which is located in the Palladian constellation. And this part, the PB or photon belt, is a junction that, of course, takes place as we go counterclockwise around the central sun Alcyon, as you see it here. There are 10,500 years in each cycle before we go into the photon belt, as you see here and here, 10,500 years. So it is a, you could say, a cyclic type of thing. Now, the photon belt is nothing new. It was known in the old days by the ancient Greek and Roman philosophers as the Golden Age. And, of course, it is an age of total light. It surpasses anything which, of course, we have known over the millenniums here in the past 10,500 years. Now, we at this time, if you look here, up here it says the null zone, which is also known scientifically as the monastic radiation. That runs from here, as you see it, to the photon belt itself, the beginning, of course, of the golden light that you see here. We are in the monastic radiation or null zone at this point in time. And it is the reformation, or you might even say the reclamation area, wherein all things must be transformed or transcended before they can go into the light, the total light, which of course is the photon belt. We have progressed for the past 10,500 years in darkness. Now we have day, and you say, well, there's daylight, there's a sun, and what have you, and that's true, there is. But again, we have night and we have day, where as opposed to the photon belt, there is no day or night. And of course, we will look at that in some of the questions and answers, which of course we'll get into a little later. We, over the past 10,500 years, have progressed now up to this point. We are in the null zone here, or the transformational area. Now, those are all scientific understandings, but I'd like to equate that also to a spiritual understanding. The photon belt, as I told you in the first fireside chat, is the home of the Christ. The null zone, or monastic radiation, is the eminence or radiation of the Christ, if you will. Now, as we near that, as you see here, following the arrows in a counterclockwise direction, as we get nearer and nearer to the null zone, or the Christ consciousness in reality, and also the photon belt, transformational processes must take place if we are, of course, to be redeemed, and if we are to be fit to pass on through into the photon belt. Now, there are many things that must happen before we can do that. We must reform the physical body into a body of light. The body of corporeality, which we've experienced here for so long, must be transformed or dropped before we can go into the photon belt, because it's total light. This null zone, or monastic radiation, is so intertwined and so compact that anything trying to pass through it that is other than light, of course, is immediately rejected. And of course, we'll talk about that over here a little later on, as to what is to happen to those who cannot make it into the null zone or the Christ consciousness and the photon belt, which again, I reemphasize, is the home of the Christ. Now, we are presently here. Science knows this, all world government knows it, but they have not told us. In fact, I was told in Europe to lecture on this is to be arrested and put in prison for an indefinite period of time. This is something the government doesn't want us to know. I don't think that the religious factors want us to know too, but it doesn't make any difference. It's happening. They are being affected by it just as much as we are. In fact, there's an interesting phenomenon taking place right now, which has to do with world government, and I'm not talking about government as we know it. I'm talking about the secret government. I'm talking about the Illuminati. They have gone to the moon, they have gone to Mars, and they have hoped to escape the coming Earth changes, which are probable. I can't say definitely that they will happen, but many have. Nostradamus said it, Edgar Casey said it, many other great readers. And it stands to reason, as you will see over here, that there has to be some reformational process take place on the earth as well as in the physical and spiritual being of us, if all of this process is to be accumulated and also successful. Now, many questions are asked many times, well, how are we going to change our physical or corporeal body into a body of light? Well, in a little while we'll look at that, and I'll tell you what you have to do in order to do it. Now, I want to drop for a moment down here to this part of the chart, if I may, and take a look at that, and so you can get a better idea of what's happening to the planet and to you at this point in time as we prepare to go into the photon belt. If you look down here, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 planets which have already reached a state of ascension, if you will. They are ready to go into the photon belt, but the only way they can go in at this point in time is with us. And if you look down here, you'll see that planet Earth has yet to ascend and become a part, a unitized part, of course, of the ascension group and process. Also, if you look over here, you'll see that all the other planets, as the process going around the photon belt is, all of them go in a counterclockwise direction, whereas Earth goes in a clockwise direction. Now, why is that? Now, during the introduction, I told you that we were very special. I said that we have been chosen to play the role that we have to be the collectors of negativity for the Creator to experience his negative and shadow side, and each one of us, every one of us, of course, are a vehicle or an integral part of the God Spirit to, in assistance and in conjunction with the Creator God, to experience our negative side as well as he or she or it, the one we call God. And that's what we've been chosen for. I can remember in 1991, I was flying back from Frankfurt, Germany, and I was sitting on a plane. I can't sleep. And I many times hear a voice inside of my head, and that voice said to me, "You have broken the mold." And I said to myself, well, what the devil are you talking about? I've broken the mold. I couldn't figure out any way how I had broken the mold. And then, of course, it dawned on me that Spirit was talking about our planet. Now, I think it happened long before I was given the message that we had broken the mold. Many say it actually happened in 1971. And, for instance, there's Michelle Siddick and others, Emmanuel and others, also claimed that it happened in 1991. Quite possibly it did. Nonetheless, we did break the precedence, that is the precedence before that was so-called reality, and we became something very special. And we want to talk about that for just a moment. Before we can ascend and join the other planets, and then, of course, go on into the Christ consciousness or the photon belt, there has to be some changes, of course, in this planet, in this consciousness, in you and I. Now, one of the things that has to happen, if you look up here, and I also depict it down here, we go in a clockwise direction, but we must reverse and go in a counterclockwise direction if we are to be in synchronicity with the other planets, and if we are to proceed, of course, once again, into the photon belt or the Christ consciousness. If you look over here, I got a little diagram. We go in a clockwise direction, but we must reverse and go in a counterclockwise direction. In other words, there's a reversal of rotation, and there's a reversal of the magnetic poles. That is to be expected. We cannot ascend until that happens. In other words, until our planet momentarily stops and reverses its, not its polarities, but its magnetic poles, or spin, if you will. And incidentally, while I'm speaking of the poles, let's talk about the polar poles. Recently, I learned that the North Pole is no longer located where it had been for so long. It is now 600 miles out into the ocean away from its original point. So it indicates that things are beginning to happen, which of course are transforming not only you and I, but the whole planet and everything that's been considered sacred and basic and understandable in the future. All of these things are over, and there's a good indication of it. Later on, perhaps we can talk about some of the physical changes that are taking place in people too. But the planet is going through transformational changes, just like you and I, and of course it has to in order to join the confederation of planets that we see here, and in order to, of course, accommodate them and go into the photon belt, which of course is the prime objective. Now, again, as I said later on, we'll talk about some of the qualities that we must, of course, achieve and overcome and own before we can go successfully, of course, into the light. Let's come now over here and look at this part of the chart. This is planet Earth in the third dimension, as you see it here. And of course, you notice that we're ascending, and we must first pass through the lower astral, as we see it here. And then ultimately we'll go to the higher astral. And once we pass through that, then we go into the fourth dimension, and then to our ultimate destination, of course, which is the fifth dimension. So these three sequences represent the process of ascension, which of course are taking place. Now, many times in my lecture tours, it happened in Japan too, just recently when I was there, well, what about those people that don't make it? What's going to happen to them? Well, the divine plan of God, of course, accommodates all things and all peoples and exigencies and name it, and there is a process which, of course, will take place. It happens here, and of course will also happen up to here, and then, of course, Earth will be free of all those other restraints and accommodations. But in the meantime, those who cannot make it go here to what is known, I call, the alternate Earth. Every planet, planet Earth, planet Venus, or whatever, has a binary. It's a binary system. They have an alternate, as we call it right here. And the souls that cannot make it into the photon belt this time, or any other time in the past, they go to the alternate planet, where they go into a deep state of sleep, and then finally they're awakened, they're reconditioned, rehabilitated, and then, of course, they descend, whereas we ascend, as you see here, they descend back down here into Earth, and they become the new planet Earth. And following that sequence, then they would, of course, experience another 10,500 years of darkness, just as we have. Now, that planet then would come out again over here 2,000 years later, which is the photon belt. Now, notice I didn't put that in there. But they would begin here as the photon belt enters. In other words, as that passes through the photon belt, they would pick up here. They would experience another 10,500 years of darkness. And then after 10,500 years, again, they have the opportunity to go into the photon belt and be home free, just as we are about to do right now. Now let's go up here to the secondary part, the third dimension. We're going through the lower dimension, which is the astral planes, incidentally, the higher astral, and of course the lower astral. And our planet is somewhere between the higher astral at this point and the lower astral. The many wars and the many things that are happening on the face of the planet right now, of course, are the accumulation of negative thoughts and negative actions of the past, which have been stored here, of course, in the lower astral. The Akashic record, of course, would be found up here in the higher astral. The lower astral, of course, is the harbor or the accumulative area for all stinking thinking and actions of the past, because we didn't deal with our bad thoughts, our unwholesome thoughts and ideas and actions. There is a law, of course, of retribution, and that law of retribution, of course, dictates that we must deal with those bad actions and bad thoughts before we can pass on into the higher astral, into the fourth and the fifth dimension, our ultimate dimension, or should we say destination. So since we didn't deal with it individualistically, we now have to deal with it as a planet at this point in time, you see. And these are the wars which are taking place all over the world at this point. For instance, there was Yugoslavia, we have Rwanda, we have Ethiopia, we have Chechen, and many others, all these more wars. So these are the accumulative, you might say, the accumulation of our bad thoughts and actions, which now we are dissipating through action here upon the face of the planet in a mass form, as opposed to an individualistic form. And we'll be talking about unwholesome thoughts and ideas a little later on. Now, this was where we were the last time I presented the Fireside Chat number 1. We're a good deal beyond that right now. We're up here on the verge of going into the fourth dimension. Many of us here on the planet at this point in time have 1 foot in the fourth dimension, and we have 1 foot, of course, in the third dimension. So many of us are already there. Our ultimate destination, of course, is the fifth dimension, and incidentally, that is the dimension from which Jesus came to earth many millenniums ago. He came from the fifth dimension. That's where he is now. This is where we must go, of course, to gain, as I told you earlier about the Photon Belt. I said we must regain our Christ consciousness, and that's what's happening right now. Here is another dictation of that, if you will. Okay, so that's a brief review of the process that's happening right now. Many question, oh, here's another point up here, too. Notice it says 208 MYS, which means million years. And then under that, of course, you notice I have Sirius. Indications are that the central sun Alcyon is over. The process is taking place on planet Earth right now is going to change all things of the past, and we're going to be elevated, of course, up here into the fifth dimension. And in the fifth dimension, all things which were, of course, true and identifiable in the past and so forth are over. So even this procedure that we're seeing here, which only happens every 26,000, roughly 26,000 years. It's actually 28,860 something, so it's roughly 26,000 years. All of this is over. And now the chief central sun is located in Sirius, and this is where the whole solar system will go, you see. We'll transcend, and we'll go into Sirius, who is really our benefactor. The Pleiades, as we call it, the Pleiades, they call it in Europe, they're coyotes. They're sometimes good and sometimes bad, and they have really never had our true interest at heart. But that's about to end. Now, secretly, the Syrians have always been influential, and of course, in our procession into the higher dimensions. But now we're going to go into the chief central sun of Sirius, because we have completed one major cycle of 208 million years. So we have gone around this central sun. You'd have to divide 26,000 into 208 million years, and I'll tell you how many cycles. I think it's 80 some odd thousands cycles that we've gone around. That's 26,000 years each that we have gone around the central sun, now called Alcyon. But now that's one major cycle, and if you add 2 and 8, that's a 1, and that's a new beginning. And that's where we're facing right now, and you will see later on with another chart that we indeed are in a new beginning, and you will see why. So let's see if there's anything I've missed here. And that's a quick review. Now, one of the important things, I said here, there will be a reversal of the magnetic poles. What's going to happen there at that time? Well, there was an ancient, he was a poet and also a philosopher, and his name was, believe it or not, Virgil, the same as mine. He was a blind poet, and I came across something that he had written some time ago. I don't remember where I saw it. Virgil said, if the earth changes take place, he didn't say they would, but if they do take place, it will take place during this reversal of the magnetic energies or poles or rotation, if you will. And that makes a lot of sense because, you know, the template and grid system as we know it will no longer be valid. So everything would have to be reshifted, equated, readjusted, and so forth, so it would stand to reason then that the earth changes would take place at that time. Now, also, at that point, it is said that there will be total darkness. Total darkness does come up here, of course, as we begin to go into the Photon Belt, and that'll be put up in the question and answer period later on. But the shifting, if you will, or reversal of the magnetic poles portends great changes both in the body of the human beings and, of course, the animals and so forth. and also, of course, for the planet. There has to be, of course, a reversal of all matter and all thinking and all consciousness at this point in time. Now, when that's going to happen, nobody knows. You know, the only one that knows, of course, is the one who created us, and we'll talk about that a little later on. There is a remote possibility, and I sure don't want to put it out as a irrefutable fact. There's a possibility that the earth changes will not occur, and that would be to the fact that we have performed well here, and we have reached the point of redemption, and you will see that later on, of course, and I believe we have, and I want to talk about that more in length later on. Okay. Would this be a good point to entertain questions about anything I've discussed so far? With the audience, are you open to questions at this point in time? Or should we go into the next part and have the questions later on?
Let's have the questions later on.
I think it'd be good to have a question right now. Let's have somebody ask the first question.
I have a question on the reversal of the magnetic poles.
Uh-huh.
If the reversal of the magnetic poles, north becomes, or the south becomes the north, would that automatically take care of the rotation of the planet?
We can automatically take care of the rotation?
Yeah.
Roger, I don't know. It portends to me, as I said a minute ago, great reformational changes, but there's a possibility that with that, as you obliquely are saying, that there might be an adjustment and earth changes will not be necessary. I don't know. I couldn't answer it, in a truthful way. I can only report to you what I have found out and what I know. I think there are two possibilities that just as Virgil said, there will be great dramatic earth changes. Nostradamus said it, Edgar Cayce said it, other great seers have seen it and said it. But that doesn't mean that it has to take place. You know, in the end, we are the gods. And each one of us were chosen to be here. And through our consciousness, as we go into this process of ascension, we can reform and change all those things. And just as you obliquely again said, cause it not to happen.
In other words, by changing our reality, we can change the
Yes,
future.
exactly. Exactly. And as the gods that we are, we have the ability to transform all things which have been fact and truth in the past. It's a good question. And of course, it gives me something to think about. I wish I could give you the answer, but I can't, really.
We'll find out.
Yeah, you're right. We'll find out. And, the only solution to all of it is love and light, to walk in love and light and balance. And then, of course, some of the factors later on, which we'll talk about, that you must master before we can go on into the, not just the null zone of the Christ consciousness, but also into the home of the Christ, the Photon Belt. Is there another question?
Virgil, as we prepare to enter the Photon Belt, what will be some of the indicators that it's occurring?
Right, that's a good question, George. Well, one of them, of course, before we go in there, we've already talked about the major one right here, of course, will be the reversal of the magnetic poles or the rotation. That is going to instrument many, many things. Darkness, of course, will be one that will be upon us. And it is said that as we near the Photon Belt, we will have at least 3.5 and quite possibly 5 days of total darkness. I mean total darkness. If we go to the Bible and we go to Revelations, we see in there indications of the stars falling out of heaven. The stars are on fire. In other words, total incendiary flames coming up and so forth. And if you would look at that, it would indicate that it would be the consummation, or not the consummation, the extinction of mankind. But those things are not true. These are phenomena which are indicative that we are nearing the Photon Belt. Revelation says the stars will fall out of the heaven. The moon will turn blood red. The sun will be no more. And but all of these things are nothing more than the phenomena of becoming closer and closer to the light. In other words, total light, you see. So those things, of course, are significant. Now, another indication, of course, is animals will go into hibernation. They of course, will be frightened, and they will all go into hibernation. The little fellows, the big fellows, and what have you, and quite possibly many of the humans also. There's a phenomenon going on right now that science doesn't talk about and government doesn't talk about. You and I saw it coming back from LA a couple of years ago, lightning. You know, as we get up here and get near and near the Photon Belt, all phenomena, including lightning, changes, and lightning doesn't go down, it goes up. And then it goes laterally, and it's abnormal, you know, compared to statistics and observations of the past. There's also, of course, major changes taking place in the body, the physical body at this time. One of the major things, of course, is the loss of fluids from the body. And I always like to ask people in my audiences, and you'd be surprised the number of people that respond. I mean, these are kids sometimes 18 in their 20s and so forth. And I say, how many people are losing fluid through their ears, their nose, their eyes, their anus, the genitals, and what have you? 90% of the hands go up. So these are what they are. They're changes which are taking place as the body reconstructs itself, you know, to accommodate the incoming Christ consciousness. As an example, I think I told you the last time that the DNA strands, we have 2 at this point in time, we'll end up having 12. We have 7 chakras, we're going to end up having 12 chakras. So that 12th chakra is going to be up there someplace. Now this, of course, is in the etheric, you know, it's not in the physical body. So during that transformational process, this will happen. The atomic structure of the body will totally change. It has to, because this planet normally moves through space at 18,000 miles per hour, and will speed up between now and the year 2000, before we go into the Photon Belt, will speed up to 208,000 miles an hour. Now, what do you think is going to happen to the physical structure, the molecular structure, the atomical structure of the body? You know, if the body doesn't change, it's going to blip out. It's just that simple. And of course, that's when these people will go up here to the alternate planet, and they'll come back here and they would do it again. So all of these things are preparatory, you might say, for making arrangements and accommodations to go into the Photon Belt. Now, Jesus did it in 3 days. We've got still 3.5 years to do it. A lot of people at this point in time, including me, stand up sometimes and you sort of fall to one side, you know. And I said, uh-oh, senility setting in, you know. And then I asked my audience, and you were with me one time, and I think we were in Santa Fe. I asked a question, about 90% of the whole group were experiencing the same phenomena. So all of these things are indicative of the transformational changes which are taking place in the physical structure, the atomical structure, the molecular structure, and so forth of our body. In other words, there's a spiritual reconstruction, if you will. Trying to think of some other things that I could add to that. I can't clear my brain right now to think of some of the things, but know that there is I asked a question in Japan having to do with the menstrual period of women. I said, how many women are becoming irregular in their menstrual period at this point in time? And in my audience, again, about 80% of them raised their hands and said, yes, it has changed. So I think it's another sign, you know, that, of course, the body is beginning to restructure and to change. Okay? Another question?
Rachel, what is the divine involvement in the whole affair?
Well, I'll get into that in just a minute. In other words, that'll be on one of the charts here. It's a secret ploy and a secret play, really. Sneaky, weaky, believe me.
I can ask another one, Bert.
Yeah.
You mentioned about the spiral, the DNA spiral increasing to 12.
Yeah.
Has there been any recordings of people going to the 4 already?
I don't know. And I don't know if I would know that if I experienced it myself. Although I have to tell you, in Bottisville, Switzerland last year, I was getting ready to go downstairs. I was at a hotel, and I was getting ready to go out and have a workshop. I was stepping out of the bathroom. I went in there to comb my hair or something at the last minute. Next thing I know, I was about 8 foot tall, looking down on the adjoining room, and I must have been there for maybe 3 or 4 seconds. And so I was out of body. I was into my 12th chakra, and I guess at that point in time too, the DNA and everything else had, at least I had momentarily, I had experienced it, you know. And I haven't talked to anybody else that has experienced the same thing.
Have you had any blood work done or anything?
No, haven't had time. Yeah. Well, perhaps I should. I don't know, but these things are taking place. And Karen, we'll get into that in just a minute because I've got a chart here and it shows the divine purpose behind it. Now, I did touch upon it briefly, and I said that each one of us here volunteered to come down here to planet Earth to be a vehicle, if you will, a volunteer, so that the divine being, the one we call the Creator God, or call him what you will, could experience his shadow or negative side. And so that's the divine intent of the whole thing, you see. But there's something more to it, and I'm keeping that chart basically towards the last. I want to show it to you.
Okay.
It blew my mind when I discovered it. Is there another question? Anyhow, those are some of the things which are happening on the planet at this point in time. You can see how fast it's all taking place. Yeah.
I
You
have a question.
Yeah.
Does the world government know about this phenomenon as well as the internet?
They certainly do. And of course, they knew, for instance, about the Photon Belt. Science discovered it in 1961. That is our current science. As I told you earlier, though, it's nothing new to the ancients. If you go to the Indians, the Hopi Indians, or whomsoever, if you study ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, if you go to the Dogons of Africa, if you go to the Aborigines, of course, of Australia, every one of them know about this great phenomenon, the Photon Belt. It's in their lore, you know, and they talk about it as just another world. For instance, the Aborigines call it my dream world. The Dogons, of course, it's a blue-black race of Africa. 20 years ago, they were telling science, you know, this and this about Sirius. This is where they come from. The Dogon race comes from Sirius. And it's sometimes also called the Blue Star. It's also, of course, in one of the major arcanes. Trying to think of it right now. It's around Polaris. It's connected with the Pleiades, of course. I'm not an astrologer, so I can't be too accurate on that. But now go back to the government. The government knows about all of this. They are afraid to tell the people for fear that they will panic. You know, this has always been their attitude, UFOs and what have you. Remember we talked about UFOs in the last presentations, and what's going to happen as we get nearer and nearer the Photon Belt of the Christ consciousness. And I said last year, in 1995, that we would have mass landings and mass sightings in 1996. It is happening all over the world. I was in Slovenia, and a young man there was working on the internet, and he came to me, and he had an internet communique which said that there were mass landings in Mexico. They were landing on top of tall buildings. They were landing in open fields, hundreds and hundreds of them. Nobody heard anything about it, and yet it was on the internet. While I was in Slovenia, they had 4 open landings in broad daylight on the Slovenian-Austrian border. Just before I left to go to Europe on this last tour, I got a call from Cass out in Columbus, Ohio, and she said they had 3 landings in broad daylight in Columbus, and in Ohio, I should say, not Columbus. And they had it on the radio and TV for 24 hours, and it was a zit. The government obviously had clamped down, you see, and closed it off. So it is happening, and we can expect a great deal more of that in 1996 on. Now, as we do get closer and closer to the Photon Belt, we're going to have more presence of UFOs. And incidentally, these are good UFOs. They're not the ones that we've been contending with for so long. In other words, the Zeta Reticuli Grays. They're through. They've gone home. And now the good forces are in here. One of the greatest worries, both of the extraterrestrials and also of the government that we're talking about and the Illuminati, is that the nuclear reactors and the nuclear stockpiles are unstable at this time. And if they go simultaneously, it'll blow this planet to dust, and we all know that. So for that reason, the extraterrestrials, will come down here and stabilize all of those reactors and stockpiles. And this is why we're going to see more and more in the form of UFO activity. The other thing is, they are going to pressure world government, including our own government, the American government, to step forward and share with the people the truth about their complicity with UFOs over the past 50 years. So it's all coming to the front, it's all happening, and here's your question about the Illuminati. For instance, they are already on the moon, on the dark side of the moon. They have colonies, and they also have colonies on the front side of the moon. But they're already on Mars also, and have been for since the 1950s. And they have readout areas there where they hope to, or they had hoped to, ride out the coming Earth changes, and of course, the process of going into the Photon Belt. Recent reports I got while in Europe was that finally they have come to the realization that they're human just like we are, and that they're subject to the same laws of God and retribution that we are, so now they're scared. And many of us, of course, knew about a book, Alternative 3, back in the 50s. I think most of us read it. And that's what that was all about, you see. How do we get off Earth and save ourselves, the hell with the people, and survive the coming Earth changes? And of course, they then also knew that this was going to take place, you see. As far back as the 50s, the Illuminati did. But now, the recent report I got in Europe, and I think it was in Austria, I believe, the report came to me, that they have decided that they too are going to come from love and light, and maybe they too will be saved. Now, talking about energy, during the reversal, of course, of the magnetic poles, there will be no electricity, nor will batteries work. So what is the alternative, other than your own light, your own inner awareness? And they, incidentally, the world government, the Illuminati, and major governments are working now on photon energy as a supplement, but for themselves, not for us, you see. Here we go again. So as long as they have those selfish desires, they're not going to succeed, and they will be the ones also who, who will go to the planet Earth, and we'll have to come back here and do it again. Okay.
This is dealing with the dyslexia factor.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the Illuminatis, and they're creating their photon lights and stuff where the general public won't be able to receive it. I heard of some experiments being done with the dyslexia factor. Whatever is created for the opposite of the good, for the selfish, will be given to the populace, and the selfish will be done without.
The Bible says that.
It does?
It's true, yeah,
well,
it does.
Times I read it, so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There will be, of course, redemption, unless they can become one with the Creator God, just like we do. Of course, they're not going to be permitted to go into the Photon Belt. As you see the latter part of this presentation, you will realize that they, of course, have to be redeemed and reformed just as we do. So that's in the process right now. Okay, we've had the review, and of course, a good deal more, but now we're going to go into the more detailed part as we have it here, which will answer the remaining questions that I think people have in their minds. But there is another question which came up during the break that I think needs to be asked, and I think, Karen, you had that question, so
Yes,
you will pose
Virgil.
it.
Could you tell us more about the Merkaba and the role it plays in us going into the Photon Belt?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, first of all, not too many people know too much about the Merkaba, and I don't either. And I very readily admit that. I do have an understanding of what it is. There are a couple of books out that have to do with, and there are teachers, I think, right here in this area. Yeah. The Merkabah, of course, in terms of sacred geometry, I know, as I've learned since I just came back from Japan, is being taught in this area. But as I said earlier, I don't think that that's detailed enough for the common man or common woman on the street. My object is to learn more about it so that I can present it in a simplified form and people can act on it on their own rather than to have to go hours upon hours with study on sacred geometry, or to learn a process which, of course, people are presenting through breathing. You know, there's something like 17 breaths plus one, and it takes hours to do this. Well, who has hours to perform this exercise every day, you know, unless, of course, you are retired. So we need to come up with a much more simplified form. Now, in my thinking on the whole thing, this is what I came up with. The Merkabah, as I told you, is interrelated to the Photon Belt and the Divine Ascension process. The Merkabah, in fact, is the vehicle through which we do ascend. It is two counter-rotating energies, one female and one male. The innermost energy, which is female, rotates in a clockwise direction. The outermost, which is the male, one subjective, of course, and one objective. The outer shell, which rotates in a counterclockwise direction, is the male. Now, those counter-rotating energies, which of course is in each and every one of us, can be mastered by the individual. But I would have to say use great caution with it because it can be potentially dangerous. I can look back in the 1970s when I was learning to do things with my aura, and I learned to dematerialize, you know, at will. I was then using the Merkabah. I didn't know it. And, but it's potentially a dangerous thing because when you go out of body totally and I stand here and you can't see me, what's happening, you know? And can the average person control that? I don't know. I did. I mastered it, and I can do it today. But it isn't something that you can teach, you know, to the common person. I think if we really want to understand the Merkabah, it's simply this. It is an unqualified energy and intelligence, which is the personification, if you will, of the Creator God. And the Creator God uses this energy and intelligence to assess and to qualify consciousness of all dimensions. The Merkabah itself is made up of 24 elders who are not the 24 elders who sit on the right hand of God, but there are another 24 elders who are Creator gods just like the other 24, but who choose to be in service to the Creator. Their whole mission is to consistently roam around God's universes and qualify who is ready to go into the next higher dimension, you know. And they are the doorkeepers and they are the door openers. Now, they will not allow ascension of any planet or solar system or galaxy unless there are 33%, 33 and 1/3%, in other words, 1/3 of any given population is then enough to allow divine ascension. In other words, when we were talking about the 10,500 years ending and going into the Photon Belt, the estimate right now is 2 billion people are ready to do that. That's 1/3 of the world population, because the world population is roughly 6 billion. So they are as I said, the doorkeepers, and they are the regulators of those who will be allowed to go into the Photon Belt or the next higher dimension, and those who cannot and will not. The Merkabah energy intelligence controls all of that. And of course, this also has to do, if you remember, I said we have to transform the body, particularly the consciousness. We have to transform the consciousness. And as we do that, of course, then we become eligible to be one of those 2 billion to ascend into the 4th and 5th dimension. But again, it's the Merkabah who controls that, and that's about all I can tell you about it. That's what little understanding I have. Now, I do know this, that if we walk in love and light and balance, if we learn to forgive, if we learn to love, those elements, of course, will transform the body into a body of light, and you automatically become a part of the divine ascension through the Merkabah. So that's why I like to keep it simple like that, because that's really the bottom line to the whole thing, not sacred geometry and some of the other things that people are teaching. I wouldn't dare say that's ego, but I think it's very qualified. In fact, I think it's too qualified to serve the masses, so to speak. That's me speaking. Thank you, Karen. Yeah. Now, does that answer it for you?
Yes.
Okay. I'll get more on that. Next time I see you and Roger, I'll have more on that. It's just coming through. Let's go into a very interesting aspect here now, and we're going to end up, of course, with repression of thoughts, which is a very interesting thing. But let's look at one of the questions that we had earlier that was not asked. It had to do, what is the divine intent of all this? In other words, the ascension and going into the photon belt and what have you. Well, here it all is. The Creator God, I told you, wanted to experience his shadow and negative side here on earth, as you see. And now he says, how am I going to do this? Now, he did it several different ways. But the two principals who are responsible for this, of course, is Lucifer and Michael. In another presentation, it's a workshop which I give, of course, I bring in the one known as Jehovah. Jehovah is the chief of the lesser gods who work directly, of course, for Lucifer. Now, there has to be a common understanding here. Lucifer, although he's the Lord of darkness, is still a Lord of light, but he plays the role of darkness. These two are brothers. They love one another. The Creator God has equal respect and equal rapport with both of these individuals. And so when he wanted to create his test here using Earth to experience his shadow or his negative self, he says, now how am I going to do this? So he called these two beloved individuals who he loves dearly, both Lucifer and Michael, and he's asked them if they would not assist him in learning his negative and shadow side. And of course, he chose the planet called Earth. They both agreed to this, and of course, there at that point in time was set up an adversarial relationship, you see, between these two. Because one is light, as you see. Michael, for instance, is light and life, L-I-F-E. And then over here we have Lucifer. Lucifer is the Lord of darkness and also synthetic life. Not real life, but synthetic life. So now we have an oppositional faction here, and but it serves well for the Creator God to experience his shadow and negative side. As I've already said, Earth was chosen as the target for this experiment, this great experiment. And as I always said earlier, of course, with the other chart when we looked at it, I said nothing can happen at this point in time until Earth joins the Confederation of Planets. And that's exactly what's about to happen. But in the process, the many 10,500 years which we have gone through in darkness and negativity, and all the things, of course, which we have experienced, which we'll discuss down here, was for a divine purpose. And the divine purpose, again, was to make planet Earth something very special and allow the Creator God to experience his negative and shadow side here on Earth. Now take a look at this, if you will. We have Lucifer over here, we have Michael here, and then progressively, look what's happening here. You see it begins to narrow here and here, and as it does, these two become one again, rather than oppositional as they have been for, millenniums. But as they get down here closer to Earth, notice that they become closer and closer together, and redemption will take place right here on Earth between these two, and it's happening right now. This is representative of the great changes which, of course, we are experiencing at this point in time. Now, there's a lot more to it. All of this has to be, of course, before we can go into the Merkabah, and also before we can go into the Photon Belt. These two are the principles, and of course, they're working directly for the Creator God, but so are we. Every one of us, here is a creator God in our own right. But we have chosen to be the instruments of the Creator so that it can experience its negative side. And there is a great reward, as I see it, in this whole thing. And that is what I call over here the new seed of consciousness. Now, the revelation that was given to me was that when planet Earth was first being created, and I'm not talking about in a state of solidity, I'm talking about a state which is ethereal in nature. In other words, before the Earth had reached a state of solidity, and right after the Creator, and he's pretty sneaky, right after the Creator had talked these two into representing him to create his own negativity here on Earth, he secretly created a seed of consciousness which he planted in the ethereal body of that to be planet Earth. So that it was like a time capsule. I just wrote an article on this not too long ago, which I want to get printed pretty soon. But it's like a time capsule, and over the millenniums it's been growing and activating and coming to a point of maturation. And now, as we get near the end of that 208 million year cycle I was talking about, it's beginning to come awake. In fact, it is already awake. These two now have joined together in love, along with Earth and the Creator, and this new seed of consciousness is now in beingness. Now, what it holds, I don't know. There's a lot of questions in my mind at this time. Does it mean that there will no longer be polarities? Does it mean that anybody, like the murderer or the persons that killed in war and so forth, will redemption be immediate? They will be forgiven? I think that's the answer to the whole thing. I really do. I think we played our role very well as human beings, time and time again, incarnation after incarnation, here on Earth. And I think because we have been in service, both the dark side and the light side here on Earth, that now all things, of course, will be washed out and we will start anew. Now, that means, of course, there will be no earth changes. There will be no Third World War. There will be all these things that are high possibilities will not take place, and a new ball game is about to begin. This is my conclusions. Now, we still have some work to do, on a personal level, as we see it right here. But to me, when I presented this in Japan, they were most excited, and George made a very good comment, too, which I had forgotten, but it's very true. This is the most ancient of symbols in the world. It was the first symbol, which is like you might say the beginning of creation. And here it is again, the new seed of consciousness. Now I find that very exciting, and I hope those out there, after they see this video, will also find it very exciting. What it portends, I don't know. I really don't. And I don't think we're supposed to know. And I'll tell you what. The 144,000 right at this point in time says, my God, what the devil's going on here? Nothing's real anymore. Because, as I said, there's a new kid in the block. He's created a new game, and the rules are totally changed. So I find that to be quite exciting. And I had somebody tell me, I don't know where it was, but he said he got a message that the 144,000 who ascended in 1991, 1992, they're in a whole state of chaos, as is the whole universe. Every eye and every focus is upon planet Earth right now, because we have now become the focal point of all consciousness. We have established a new criteria, a new ball game, as I said, a new standards that you talk about. It is new, the new seed of consciousness. And it's changed all the old archaic considerations and rulings that we have been victims of for so long, including those called the wormwood people who put us here, you see. So it's going to be exciting in the next 3.5 years to see what happens. Will there be a complete forgiveness? I hope so. What is the key to the whole thing? Well, the key is right there. That new seed of consciousness is love. Love and forgiveness. That's that bottom line. As as I said, now we do have some work to do here on a personal level, but it's not the most difficult work in the world. And it's all part of becoming that new seed of consciousness. Let's talk about this next chart then, the repression of thoughts. During the break, we were talking about fear. And fear, of course, is something that was thrust upon us, manufactured in order to control us and keep us here on earth in illusion and also in amnesia. Question?
I have a question. Back to the seed of consciousness.
Yeah.
I read a few years ago that Earth has the greatest gene pool of the universe because it's been settled by so many civilizations from other worlds. And there was a warp at one time, time of Atlantis or pre-Atlantis, there was a warp that opened a window where billions of other civilizations came in.
That's true.
And we have the greatest gene pool in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be what the new seed of consciousness, where all this gene pool becomes conscious or has the Christ awareness?
I don't think so, Roger.
No.
I think it's beyond that. I agree with you. I learned about the same thing.
I was just wondering that.
Yeah, it's a good thought. This is something totally apart from anything we've ever experienced or has ever happened in the past. It's brand new. And that's why I say nobody knows, including the masters, what the devil is going to happen. So, now I'm sure that what you're saying there was part of the maturation, to get to this point that there would be a new seed of consciousness. All the things that we have experienced for so long, of course, brought this up to this point of fruition and caused it to happen. Remember I said on the plane that Spirit said to me, you've broken the mold? Well, here it is right here. It's now in manifestation. We have become the darling, if you will, of all the universes. Every eye is upon us at this point in time. And they like what they see. And that's very important. There is no right, there is no wrong, there only is. The rest of it's judgment. That's wrong, this is good, and all that. That's a judgment. And here it is right here, prejudice, if you will. I have a workshop, of course, and I teach these things: fear, hate, prejudice, grief, unwholesome thoughts, and selfish desires. These are traps, of course, which were created for us in this world of polarity to keep us here and control us. And progressively, though, 1/3 of us, each and every 10,500 years, have mastered these things, and we've gone home to become greater beings. But there are many who have not mastered it, and of course these are the things that they have to overcome at this point in time. Let's talk about fear. There is no such thing as fear. It's created by you. It's the little self, if you will. It's the expectation of the unknown in a negative way. It's created, of course, through inadequacy and many other factors, of course, which have been the creators of such a thing as fear. I know, for instance, in combat, I never feared, because just before going in, I would say my prayers to God, and then I would say, basically, all right, big guy, it's yours. I'll do my part, you do yours. And then I go in, and of course, everything turned out okay. But that was me. Most people do fear. Hate, of course, is one of the biggest ones on earth. Hate is just the opposite side, the opposite mirror side of love. And, of course, we were taught to fear, we were taught to hate by those who put us here and have controlled us, of course, for the many, many millenniums. These were all tools to keep us from knowing that indeed we were gods, and that indeed, of course, we didn't belong here. All right, our next one then, of course, has to do with prejudice, and I think I can put in that also judgments, really. Everything is a judgment. This is good, this is bad, this is negative, this is positive, and what have you. Everything's a judgment, and all of that is purposeful in nature. It has been created again to control us through repression of proper thinking. Stinking thinking gets stinking actions. Love and forgiveness, as I told you earlier, is the only way to go to overcome these things, prejudice, and what have you. Now, these things, of course, has a good side and a bad side. Hate, I don't know if there's a good side to hate, but there is a good side to fear. For instance, people fear the government, people fear the police, and people fear authority, and sometimes that's good. But to use fear in your everyday life and fear things which are not real, there's where the controlling factor is. Grief. I discussed that in Japan. You know, when somebody dies over there, it's a very, very religious thing, and it is here too. But in most every country, you know, all the wailing. Look what happens in Palestine. Look what happens, for instance, in Israel when somebody's killed. The wailing, the gnashing of the teeth, and the hatred, and the prejudice, the fear, and all that comes out. And all these are things which were taught to us from the time we came out of the womb to do, again, to control us, to keep us here, to keep us from realizing that indeed we are creator gods, that it is time to go home and we don't belong here. Grief. We die the day we come out of the womb. That's death. Right now we're sitting in death. You know, when you die, you're reborn. That's a time to celebrate. That's not a time to wail and gnash your teeth and hate and do all the things that we do, which actually keeps the spirit from passing over if we do too much of it. Well, we all know that. And it's like, for instance, the Irish, they get up and they urinate on the grave, and they do a dance on it, you know. Other tribes, like tribes that went heavy, they have ceremonial dances, and they send that soul on its way in a very positive and good way to say, hey, you don't belong here anymore, you know, go, have fun. It's a good thing. But no, we've been taught to grieve in a way that, of course, it deters us from being wholesome and having good thoughts about those who pass over. And it all ties in with this, unwholesome thoughts and selfish desires. Remember in the early part of the presentation, I talked about the lower astral. And this is where all this goes, unwholesome thoughts and selfish desires. Many times people ask me, for instance, what's on the other side in terms of the fourth dimension? Well, as an example, you wear your heart on your face. You wear your thoughts on your face. And if I was to look at a Karen and say, I'd like to go to bed with her, where does it go? Right up here on my face. She sees it, everybody else sees it. So there's no way to hide. And incidentally, all the energies which are coming in right now are subjective in nature. They're rooting out all the old and hidden things, and they're bringing them to the surface. Well, just look around the world and see the things that's happening right now, you know, in terms of revelations. And I mean, revelations which, of course, make others vulnerable, like the Illuminati, as I mentioned earlier. So unwholesome thoughts and selfish desires are something we all have to control right now if we are to be a part of the divine ascension, of course, and I'm sure a part of the new seat of consciousness. Now, the greatest thing you have here on earth, which has the most power and will automatically overcome all of this, is love and forgiveness. Many times I say to my audiences, love is God and God is love, and it's the truth. You know, if you can live that, then all of these things don't need a hill of beans. So these are some of the things which you, the listeners and viewers of this videotape, these are the things that you must do if you want to be a part of what is known as the divine ascension. Okay, well, that's about it. At least I think it gives you something to think about. It goes beyond tape number 1, the Photon Belt number 1. These are the things that I'm teaching right now throughout the world. They're additives to the first tape. And of course, I'm sure when we do the third tape, there'll be a good deal more. We certainly will have a lot more on this, the new seed of consciousness. And whether we like it or not, we're going to be a part of it. Well, with that, I then would like to bring this to a conclusion. And I'd like to take this opportunity once again to thank the viewers for allowing me once again to appear before you and show you and share with you some of my constructive thinking about what's taking place not only the consciousness of the planet, but also the consciousness of the universe at this point in time, and particularly in your consciousness and mine. Some of the things that I said may appear to be somewhat outlandish, but I tell you this, don't sell them short, don't discard them, don't get rid of them until you've examined them and made sure that's what you want. Remember this, there are no judgments. There is no right, there is no wrong, there only is. The is, of course, bears responsibility. If you is, you is, but you also must accept the responsibility that goes with whatever it is you do, you know. And that's the way I live my life, you know. The things that I do, if I make a mistake, I don't blame anybody. It's me who made the mistake, and I accept the responsibility for it, and then I work through it. I can't say that God made me do it. I can't say that somebody in this room made me do it. I did it. I must bear the responsibility. It has to do with unwholesome thoughts, selfish desires, greed, prejudice, hate, fear, what have you. It's me. You know, I'm the Alpha and the Omega. And so are you as you watch this film and presentation. With that, I'd like to say once again, thank you for allowing me to appear before you once again. I hope you're as excited about all this as I am, particularly the new seat of consciousness. I know others are beginning to experience it and talk about it in the world too, but I am very, very excited with it, and I'm looking forward to what's going to be happening in the very near future, and of course right now. God bless you and good luck, and thank you very much.